Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for joining the webinar of Renew Europe on children's rights in the digital world, which I will be hosting today together with my colleague Hilde Vautmans. And we will start with an hour-and-a-half panel on the issues children face when they surf across the internet as a consumer. Think privacy, data usage, and marketing. And Hilde will address the specific issues of sexual abuse online in the second panel that will start at 3:30. So before introducing today's topic and speakers, I would like to give a warm welcome to the participants following us on the live cast. I cannot wait to organize the events and see you live again. But for now, it's clear that we had to organize again an online meeting, but I hope this will be the last one for the near future. And moving on to today's subject, children's rights in the digital world. 1 out of 3 internet users is under 18, a number that got an extra boost during the pandemic and one that continues to grow. And the internet offers children the opportunity to follow education, to do research, and to meet friends online. And it unlocks information and news and visual content. And I think children can really learn from this and build rich experiences. And the opportunities are really endless, which is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. Yet I am worried. The internet grew fast and organically in the past decades, but it was really never designed with children in mind. To navigate the internet in a safe way. And additionally, we have seen worrying developments in which children reported to have been exposed to harmful content, including suicidal and sexual content, as well as, for example, tobacco ads. And finally, the data of children has been abused for commercial practices, has been sold to the highest bidder, including online profiling without the necessary consent. Hence, the growing number of court cases against several of these tech companies. And with new legislation, such as the Digital Services Act, as well as a new European strategy for better internet for kids on the way, we have an opportunity to fix these issues. And I am pleased to have a panel discussion here today with very good panelists, very good experts, as well as with the European Commission, who have agreed to share with us their views on, first, the most pressing issues when it comes to children online, the rights online, and secondly, where we will be asking them which concrete actions are needed from policymakers. So now I would like to give the floor to Emilio Puccio, who will introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Liesje. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So as Liesje said, we have ahead of us a very intense program with 2 different panels. So before introducing the speakers, please allow me to give a few short announcements. So each of these panels will be followed by a Q&A session that can be then. So the people who are actually following online have the option to go to the chat box and then ask the question that we'll read out at the end. So now it's a great pleasure for me to introduce the wonderful lineup of speakers that we have for this first panel. So we have with us here today Guido Scorza, who is the board member of the Italian Data Protection Authority. Then we have Baroness Biban Kidron, who is the founder of Child Rights Foundation, which is a civil society initiative that aims to make the digital world a more transparent and empowering place for children. Then we have with us also Professor Sonia Livingstone, who is Professor of Social Psychology at the London School of Economics and Political Science. And she's also the lead drafter on the United Nations General Comment 25 on children's rights in relation to the digital world. Then we also have Dr. Olga Kadzova, who is professor at the Moscow School of Social and Economic Sciences. She's also a children's law expert and former member of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child and co-coordinator of the working group on the General Comment 25. Following, we will have Mr. Sean Litton, who serves as executive director of the Tech Coalition, an initiative that is formed of industry leaders who specialize in online child safety issues. And then, last but not least, we have Miss June Lowry Kingston, who serves as head of unit Accessibility, Multilingualism, Safer Internet at DG Connect of the European Commission. which is the unit responsible for the better internet strategy for kids, as well as to ensure that child safety rules are adopted in the work by other units in the Commission. So should we go direct? Should I go back to you, Liesje? Or we can start with Guido Scorza? Okay, please, Guido, then the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to the organizer for the invitation and the opportunity to share with you my ideas about one of the most important problems I think we have in the internet governance. How guarantee that young people benefit from the extraordinary opportunities offered by the internet, limiting to the maximum, because there is things or nothing that can be done to eliminate them, the risk that occur online as offline. I believe that the necessary starting point of our discussion must be the idea that internet was not designed for child, but today child populate it, grow up on it and use it. We need to imagine the internet as a theme park in which among many child-friendly attractions, there are some, probably most of them, that are not. Continuing with the metaphor, let me say that we need to imagine roller coasters whose trains have seat belts designed for people at least 1 meter tall and who are no younger than a certain age. If a child shorter or younger gets on board, unfortunately, there is little that can be done to guarantee a safe ride. In this context, I have no doubts that it is necessary to draw boundaries between digital platforms and services for everyone, including children, and digital platforms and services reserved for those with at least a minimum age. To trace these boundaries, we need to use age verification tools. But age verification tools not based on identity verification. It is a point very, very important. What needs to be verified is that the person is at least the minimum age necessary to use a service, not also who he is. I think that we have to be very, very clear. We don't have to legitimize the platform and service provider to process more data, more personal data of their user, especially the younger ones, but simply to force them to use the data and the profiling algorithms they already use also for this different purpose, or even better, to deliver the necessary data and technologies to trusted public or private third party. What, in my opinion, has become intolerable is that the platform today know a great deal about all their users, including the youngest ones, and use this knowledge to maximize their profit, but not also to keep out those who are not old enough to use the platform themselves. Essentially, in my opinion, we need to provide, I don't know if by law or simply by soft law, that to access to a platform reserved to users with a minimum age, users need to demonstrate their age using an age verification service. Better, of course, if managed by a trusted third party. There is also another issue that, in a perspective of protecting the privacy of children, is very close to my heart, and in relation to which an intervention would also be necessary. Like it or not, today we pay for many online services with our personal data. This is a problem that, regardless of the protection of children, should be addressed with urgency and determination, since fundamental rights, such as privacy, shouldn't become a bargaining chip on global market. However, regardless of the solution of the general problem, I believe there is no doubt that a child cannot evaluate how much their personal data are worth and how much of themselves and their personal identity they give up just to see some videos, just to send messages to friends or play online. If it is true that each one of us, including children, of course, online is the sum of their personal data, essentially today we are accepting that children literally sell themselves online in order to benefit from some services. To avoid this trafficking of personal identities of children, it is essential to forbid that a minor can approve the term of use of any online service that requires the processing of personal data other than technically and not even commercially strictly necessary for the use of the service. However, in a world increasingly governed by software and algorithms, and less, unfortunately, the law and the regulation coming from the states, we can't solve such complex problems without technology helping us to defend ourselves, starting, of course, from our children, from technology itself. In this sense, it is essentially, in my opinion, that the protection of children become a design constraint. New technology must be, by design, child-proof, to avoid the risk that in the future we will not find ourselves here again trying to limit the risk a child faces using a digital service that was simply not designed for them. And to be sure about the child-proof nature of any new digital service and platform, it will be necessary to provide by law that the launch of new digital service and platform can't take place without a prior child impact assessment, an impact assessment in which it is necessary to verify whether and what are the consequences, the effects, the risk of the existence of the platform or service on children, and which are the measures that have been adopted to minimize any risk to their natural and sustainable development. Finally, it is perhaps useful to remember ourselves that none of these ideas will allow us to solve the problem if we do not invest all resources we have in the digital education of trainers first and then of children. Without digital culture, unfortunately, the risk associated with our online life are and remain destined to be more than the opportunities. Thank you very much again for the opportunities to be here. And I hope it will be the first of a series of similar occasions in search of a solution or more than a solution for what can be considered one of the most important challenges that awaits humanity in the years to come. I'm sorry if I have to leave, but unfortunately today, now exactly, we have a board, the plenary section of the board for some problem about the Green Pass. Thank you again and keep in touch.
Thank you so much, Guido, for such a comprehensive presentation. Thanks as well for actually providing us with specific solutions. And thanks as well for the immense work done by the Italian Data Protection Authority. Thanks as well for also highlighting the fact that children themselves are not able to evaluate themselves how much their data is worth. And thanks as well for also providing and walking us through these several solutions that unfortunately the solution itself cannot be found only on the legislation is a combination of legislation, soft law, as you said yourself very well, but very much as well in the technological companies themselves. And we will hear more today with the speakers that we have in this panel. Thank you so much for that, Guido. I will now move on and give the floor to Baroness Biban Kidron. Biban, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emilio, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about some practical matters of legislation and regulation, but before I do, I briefly want to introduce myself and the Five Rights Foundation. Five Rights Foundation is a UK headquartered NGO whose mission is to build the digital world that young people deserve. And it's clear to us that children need and want access to the digital world. So all the solutions we come up with today must not lock them out, but rather build a world that accounts for their presence and upholds their rights. As well as being founder and chair of Five Rights, I'm also a crossbench peer in the UK House of Lords. And in that capacity, I introduced the Age-Appropriate Design Code, which sets out how companies should ensure that under 18s receive the specific protections for their data that the GDPR mandates. The digital world has transformed from being purely a communication tool to vast advertising and consumer platforms that have disrupted business practices and norms. And I don't think it's properly acknowledged when discussing protection that in many ways we don't have an issue of technology, but one of business practice, as the design of products and services are supercharged to access user data, attention, and time at any cost, even if that delivers societal or individual harm. No environment and no child can be 100% safe. Indeed, both negotiating risk and transgressing boundaries are crucial to child development. But what we have currently is a digital world built by and for adults that routinely fails to acknowledge children's presence and respond to the rights and vulnerabilities associated with age. The EU is at the forefront of international efforts to rectify this and ensure a digital world that is rights respecting. So let me turn quickly to three issues. First, GDPR has made a critical contribution which we can build on. In introducing the Age-Appropriate Design Code, I was seeking to interrupt the intrusion on children and childhood of current business practice. Its 15 provisions ensure that children are offered more privacy by default, less exposure to adult strangers, less commercial exploitation. It prohibits nudges to lower privacy, share their data, or extend their use. And importantly, it prevents companies using children's data to profile them to promote detrimental material such as self-harm, pro-suicide, pro-ana, and so on. The code comes into force this week in the UK, and in anticipation of its arrival, we've seen some announcements from some of the biggest platforms in the world. Among them, Google and Instagram have stopped targeted advertising for children. Safe search as a default for all under 18s on Google. TikTok and Instagram ending stranger adults being able to direct message children. TikTok preventing notifications through the night. YouTube, age assurance for adult videos, and have turned off autoplay for under 18, as well as introducing a number of well-being features. The EDPB is about to start work on guidelines on data protection for children, which we hope will harmonize protections for children across the EU. And we trust that this initiative will have the support of your group and national governments, as it is appearing to do around the world in the US, Australia, Canada, amongst others. The DSA, beyond data protection, the DSA offers a singular opportunity to set clear minimum standards that protect children online. These should cover at a minimum moderation, age assurance, report and redress, algorithmic oversight, risk assessments, so that parents and children can understand the services and products that they're using, and business meets the expectations of children and parents. Five Rights, together with the main children's rights platforms and many other organizations, is calling for a children's clause in the DSA. And we ask that all DSP assess whether their services are likely to be accessed or impact on children, and that if they do, they then have a series of duties that uphold children's rights. A few key points. It's critical that children's rights be addressed in a horizontal legislation and not confined to sectorial laws such as CSEA or toy safety. Age assurance is absolutely feasible. And Five Rights has written a very good report, which I recommend to you on this subject. And I myself am putting forward a bill in the UK Parliament. This is no longer a question of technology, but a question of governance and minimum standards. It's time to correct in the DSA the confusion around childhood versus age of consent. These are two very different matters. And then finally, the children's clause that we propose, the focus is on system design, not on regulating content. Let me finish with a few words on AI. At Five Rights, we're working on an algorithmic oversight regime, which will help to fill the gaps in the AI Act and make enforceable the excellent principles that this regulation proposes. Unless and until oversight of automated systems is a norm, we will never have a fair and equitable or accountable digital world. My view of the digital world is that it's been shamefully slow to uphold its responsibilities to children, and that lawmakers have been confused by the language of technology and exceptionality. These are businesses. It is wholly designed, largely privately owned, and just as it is designed with risk and exploitation into the system, so it can be designed to deliver on children's safety and rights first. Five Rights were proud to be the consultants to the Council on the Rights of the Child in its recently adopted General Comment 25, which has been welcomed and cited across the world, importantly included in the EU Children's Strategy. It is an extraordinarily important step for children, and I look forward to hearing more from the next two speakers, my colleagues, Sonia and Olga, and I will leave that privilege to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Biban. Thank you so much as well for your personal and tireless commitment on child safety and for the wonderful and tremendous work done by Five Rights Foundation on that regard. Thank you so much for that. And thank you as well for also highlighting how important it is the system, design and prevention by design that actually, which will eventually prevent and ensure that the experience of children online is a safe one. Thank you so much for that. So now I'd like to give the floor to Professor Sonia Livingstone. Sonia, please, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Emilio, and for the invitation to speak today. I'm a psychologist among politicians, policymakers and lawyers, and for a long time my focus has been on the evidence from children's point of view in terms of their experience of digitally related access, skills, risks, opportunities and safety. And two recent reports, the 2019 Global Kids Online Comparative Report, 11 countries and 4 continents, and the 2020 EU Kids Online report of findings in 20 European countries, both produce a wealth of evidence about the pressing need for clear policy direction and action framed by children's rights. And my current work with the 3 EC-funded projects, Children Online Research and Evidence, Y Skills and You Consent, continue this effort to generate evidence useful for policy. So it was a privilege to work with colleagues, including Baroness Kidron and the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child in drafting the General Comment 25 on children's rights in relation to the digital environment. And this initiative had a long history of need of calls for action from child rights advocates, and interestingly, increasingly also from internet governance circles, seeking clarity about how children's rights apply in relation to the digital environment. As a document, of course, it's directed at states, but it says also a lot about businesses. And Olga Kazova will set out the content and its legal and political importance after I've made my remarks. I thought in the next few minutes, I'd just draw out some of the issues that arose in the drafting, because this is a difficult area and it's not by accident that it's been put off, I think, for a long time, and is now incredibly welcome that we finally have, if you like, a very clear mandate for action in the form of the general comment. As a text, it went through three very thorough rounds of consultation. Firstly, on the concept note, the Committee on the Rights of the Child put the concept note out for public consultation 2 years ago and received responses across sectors and from many states and civil society and business actors around the world. It was then put out for consultation again on the draft text. As you may know, it's a 10,000 word document, not so very long, which follows the structure of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and shows point by point just how children's rights apply in the digital environment and what states must, should and could do. So that generated, again, a very considerable body of input. And then, really crucially, there was a global consultation of children led by my colleague Amanda Third at the at Western Sydney University, which included more than 700 children in 26 countries and as many languages, in accordance with Article 12 of the Convention, the child's right to be heard. So 3 rounds of consultation, a lot of drafting, a lot of stakeholder input. Both surfaced many of the difficult issues which really do face the implementation of children's rights in digital world, but also produce many clever ideas and ways of framing and resolving issues which have, I'm glad to say, found their way into the final version, and I think will prove incredibly helpful. I hope so. So I think simplest to say is that the general comment on the rights of the child asserts very clearly that children's rights apply everywhere in a digital world. We've long said that rights offline should apply online, but it's been challenging to bring that about. And here now is a document that provides a clear mandate for government, an authoritative document, a comprehensive set of requirements and practical ways forward. As a text, it puts children first, not last. It anticipates their needs rather than treating them as the canaries in the coal mine and discovering their problems later and trying to kind of ineffectively retrofit the digital world expensively and belatedly. And rather than seeing it as somehow problematic or difficult that children participate in the digital world, it sees this precisely as a child's right, their human right. As I think was already said, the effort is not to burden children and their parents to keep themselves safe in an adult space, but rather the general comment frames a digital world that includes children fairly, that anticipates their needs as for any other group through policy, innovation and system design, and where the burden of responsibility falls on states and business. It was a guiding concern, particularly from the committee, to keep in balance questions of opportunities and risks to ensure that children are empowered in relation to the digital environment as well as protected. And that balance can be achieved through reference to the fundamental principle of best interests. The general comment recognises that overprotection can have costs for children's civil rights and freedoms, and so it seeks a holistic approach, one that does not rank rights, and that is very careful in realising one right without being at the cost of another. So the guide is always that actions should be lawful, proportionate and necessary. And I would add, of course, they should always be evidence-based rather than led by technological or moral panics. As a text, it begins with children's civil rights and freedoms. These are often forgotten, so I just want to flag them. I think Greta Thunberg did children a great favor in demonstrating really the importance of children as civil, even political actors. The document sets out what children need in that regard, including access to information and a host of resources. The children's consultation, and very strong among many stakeholders around the world, is the importance of access. It's a key issue still for children. They consider it a right, and it remains crucial also in the relatively wealthy countries of Europe, where many inequalities, forms of digital exclusion, and potential for discrimination remain. So there's a tension, and we need sustained attention, particularly for children with disabilities, refugees, those speaking minority languages, LGBTQ children, and so forth. My colleagues have already commented on the importance of privacy and data protection. It is a very large section in the general comment, because privacy in many ways has become reliant on data protection in a digital world. And perhaps I'll just highlight, in the interests of time, the key principle that commercial interests should not trump children's best interests in relation to data exploitation, surveillance, biometrics, and so forth. Perhaps my last comment is to say the importance of the digital as something which is cross-cutting, which affects all aspects of children's lives, and therefore requires horizontal, not just kind of sector-specific legislation and coordination from states. And so there's a whole host of actions that states can take that, in addition to being concerned with education or information or child protection, also concern questions of due process, provision of remedy, ensuring that there is independent monitoring, and so forth, so that the process and the mechanisms by which children's rights are delivered and guaranteed is as strong and as much a responsibility of states as is their protection and fulfillment of their rights in particular areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Livingstone. Thank you a lot as well for your leading role in the United Nations General Comment 25. Thank you as well for keeping providing us with evidence, also for informing them, policymakers and lawmakers, to then actually make sure that this legislation is very child rights proof, as said. And thank you as well for also highlighting the fact that children's rights are human rights, and that of course then is stemming directly from this principle that the horizontal approach, as also Baroness Kindram was saying, it has to involve both the education and the legislation itself. Thank you so much for that. So now I'll give the floor to Dr. Olga Kadzova. I hope I pronounced it very well, the last name. Please, the floor is yours.
Absolutely, thank you. I have a presentation, if I may share it with you. Yes, here, sorry. I need to go to the beginning. Yes. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the conveners for inviting me. It's really a great pleasure and honor to talk to you. And I will give a brief overview of the general comment number 25, really brief within the time limits. And it was adopted by the Committee on the Rights of the Child at February session 2021. So literally very, very recently. This was my last session at the committee, and I'm really very happy that we managed to adopt it while I was at the committee, because this was really our child. I see Bibin smiling. She knows how we treasure this general comment. First of all, about the convention. The Convention on the Rights of the Child 1989 proved to be an amazing instrument. It was created in the pre-digital era when internet, social networks, and the notion of digital environment didn't exist. So no surprise that the convention, or the CRC, as we call it for brief, doesn't contain any single article directly related to the digital environment. However, the convention turned out to be a true living instrument, and its provisions are completely applicable to children's life online. Just a second. At the screen, you may see the structure of the general comment and that it covers all children's rights grouped in clusters. I think it is indicative. The whole child's life is there. Access and non-discrimination, safety and protection, the best interests of the child evolving capacities, child right to be heard, the right to life survival and development, the right to have access to information and freedom of expression, family environment, privacy, already mentioned many times, education and health, children with disabilities, children in extreme situation, training of professionals, and so on and so forth. Due to a shortage of time, I have to limit myself to a very brief overview of some of the key aspects of children's life online through the lens of the convention that will hope to understand you the logic of the general comment and in general the committee's general approach to these issues. So first, non-discrimination. Non-discrimination is one of the child's rights that has been assigned the status of a general principle. This right requires that states ensure that all children have equal, effective, free, and safe access to the digital environment. Children consider access to digital media and ICTs as their fundamental right. They say, if you are not on the net, you are fully excluded. Provisions related to civil rights and freedoms, I will literally say a few words because Sonia already spoke of them and actually flagged them because of their crucial importance in the context of digital environment. Of course, these provisions aim to ensure that children can exercise the rights to freedom of expression, access to information, and other civil rights, though at the same time to be protected from harmful materials. In this regard, in the digital environment context, already mentioned many times, the right to privacy is everyone's concern, number one. And the general comment deals with it quite in detail. There are really 12 paragraphs I calculated, and it is the longest piece in the general comment. Violence is our common pain, and digital environment regrettably opens up new ways to perpetrate violence against children. One of the difficulties is that children usually are not properly aware about all the risks associated with being online. Too often, children are influenced to do harm to themselves. Online child sexual abuse in different forms is a reality. General comment also emphasizes the risk that may come from non-state groups, particularly terrorist or violent extremist groups that may recruit children and get them involved in violence. Hopefully, these provisions will help the states to take effective measures to protect children. Family environment. Nowadays, children, as we say, growing up digital, and we probably still do not properly understand the extent to which this affects both childhood and parent-child relations. So balancing parental responsibilities and parents' duty to protect children and the child's privacy and growing autonomy as the child develops has always been a challenge, familiar to many parents. However, with regard to the digital environment, these things become much more complicated because it is much more difficult technically to control child's online activity, and children are often much more ahead than their parents or caregivers with respect of the online opportunities. Therefore, the key message that general comment addresses to the states is to ensure that appropriate digital education or special guidance or support to parents and caregivers are available. Now, when General Comment 25 has been adopted, the task is to properly implement it. And these issues are addressed in the part General Measures of Implementation. Sure, there should be legislation on different issues related to digital environment, and this legislation should be, of course, in line with children's rights. It is absolutely crucial to have policies and strategies, plans, in order to have a clear picture of what specifically should be done, how it should be done, and who will be responsible for their realization. General Comment recommends the states to identify a government body that is mandated to coordinate all the activities among central government departments and the various levels of government. Such a national coordination mechanism should engage with schools, with ICT sector, and cooperate with businesses, civil society, academia, and organizations at all levels, national, regional, and local. As to businesses, I will just say literally 2 words because it was already highlighted. But there is a special part, very detailed in the general comment, and it is specifically emphasized the importance for the states to engage with businesses as the design and delivery of the digital worlds largely in the hands of businesses. So to conclude, if I have to choose 3 most important messages to policy makers and all those who will be implementing the general comment, I would highlight the following. Firstly, and I'm happy it is in line with what the previous speaker said, it is absolutely crucial to ensure education of children in their parents and caregivers, school teachers, and all those who work with and for children, including those in children's institutions, child protection officers, policemen, prosecutors, and so on. Judges, of course, too, as they all may have to deal with different issues related to digital environment, and now they are usually not well educated to use very politically correct wording. Secondly, of course, of crucial importance while creating policies, strategies, plans, and legal regulation to work in close cooperation with service providers or businesses. Most importantly, service providers should be sensitized towards children's rights in general and in relation to digital environments specifically. And thirdly, and finally, this also is in line with, I think Sonia said, as we know, digital environment impacts on children's rights both in positive and negative way. It is fundamentally important not to completely separate these 2 interconnected dimensions. Therefore, it is crucial to find a proper balance between protection and access, or in other words, carefully balance opportunities and risks. I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kadzova. thank you so much as well for general comment number 25, which is absolutely, of course, a major achievement, especially also just to clarify, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child is, of course, our guiding star. It's in all the work that we do here in the European Union. So this is very much a major achievement. And now these comments clearly states that the children's rights enshrined in the convention also apply in the digital world. Thank you so much for that, especially as well also for highlighting what are the risks that the online world poses on children. And we will hear more about that as well in the second panel. So now, before giving the floor to Sean, you're going to have a very, very difficult job now because, you know, we've been hearing a lot today as well over the months in the EU, how crucial the role of the tech industry it is. Whether this is by parental control tools by design, age verification tools in preventing and fighting these crimes, especially in this, of course, in this framework of the fact that we cannot do this alone and that we need necessarily a multi-stakeholder approach. So we are now excited to actually hear from you, Sean, who served as executive director of the Tech Coalition. If you can tell us a bit more what the tech industry is doing to make sure that children have a safe experience online. Sean, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Emilio. Thanks for that introduction. And thank you to the other panelists. Just a phenomenal panel. And it's very clear to me there is a lot of moving parts in this space and there's a lot going on. And I really appreciate the quality and the thoughtfulness of the recommendations. By way of introduction, I'm the executive director of the Technology Coalition, and I want to just explain a little bit about what the coalition is, talk a little bit about what we're doing, and hopefully I won't have time this morning to respond to all the issues that have been raised. That would take the rest of the session, but I will give you a little bit of information and introduce a little transparency from industry on this topic. So the Technology Coalition was formed in 2006. It was reinvigorated earlier this year with the launch of Project Protect, which I'll talk about in just a second. It is a global coalition of tech industry leaders, and the focus is on eradicating online child sexual exploitation and abuse. What we primarily do is facilitate collaboration within industry towards this mean. It's an industry association, and we also facilitate industry engagement with external stakeholders. These are our current members. As you can see, we have most of the leading tech firms there. And then this year, since the relaunch, we've added these additional members. And I was pleased to hear Baroness Kidron mention some of our members and the efforts they took in the previous few weeks on privacy, et cetera. So here are the different sectors we represent. And if you look at these percentages, you can see they'll add up to more than 100%. What this means is about 21% of our members are involved in the gaming industry, 42% host some kind of live streaming platform, et cetera. Many of our members are involved in different sectors of industry, but it crosses all the different sectors. And our vision is a global tech industry that's fully mobilized to keep all children safe from abuse and sexual exploitation. What we actually do is we're uniting the global tech industry to build tools, very practical tools and advanced programs and policies that will protect children from online sexual exploitation and abuse. The Technology Coalition is fundamentally about increasing industry's capacity to deal with these issues and make children safe. So what do we do? Last year, we launched Project Protect. It's a 5-pillar plan, and I'm just going to run quickly through the 5 pillars. First of all, we're funding independent research, and this is research that will guide all of our interventions, and it's in a partnership with End Violence Against Children. We'll be announcing some grantees later in September. And this research is actually geared towards how to inform the tech industry on its policy and its practice and where new innovations are necessary. We are also investing in tech innovation. Currently, we have 2 priorities. One is on what we call universal video hashing. And I think later on, you'll hear more about hashing for those of you who are not familiar with it. But currently for still images, there is sort of an industry standard, so all the different technologies can communicate, but we don't yet have that for video hashing, and we're working on that. We're also working on a platform that will allow industry members to share information much more quickly to ensure that harmful material is taken down immediately across all platforms. The bread and butter of the Technology Coalition is this idea of information and knowledge sharing, and that is where actual collaboration is critically important. And this is where companies are sharing their lessons with one another, and then we're building resources to guide both mature companies and particularly new companies that are just moving into this space. So for example, a new social media platform, that we would have the resources available for them, both on the technical side and the policy and practice side, so that they could quickly ramp up and ensure that there's no misuse of their platform to hurt children. And the other prong of our project is to drive transparency and accountability within industry. This is the #1 request we get externally, and this is so that people understand what industry is doing and what is happening within industry. And lastly, we facilitate collective action, and these are dialogues between industry and external stakeholders, including policymakers, civil society, survivor groups, et cetera. And the idea there is to make sure that people understand where each party is at and what each party's agenda and priorities are, and to see if we can find common paths forward to deal with some of these issues. Earlier this year, we hosted a series of dialogues, first on reporting, and a lot of that involved Europe and the potential for a new European center. And then secondly, we had a series of dialogues on what is sometimes referred to as self-generated imagery, and also referred to as perceived first-person child sexual abuse material. And we worked with regulators and law enforcers, et cetera, to try and figure out the best way forward to address these issues. I want to just, in terms of transparency, give you a sense of what industry is doing, at least what our members are doing. This is the level of implementation of hash-based detection. And this is for known child sexual abuse material that has a hash identifier. 100% of our members are either currently implementing or are right now in the process of implementing image-based detection. This is for still images. And just over 50% have implemented a video-based hash detection system. Not all of our members actually use video, so that's why that number is a bit lower. In terms of new material and detecting new child sexual abuse material that's posted online, our members use what are called classifiers, which are technical algorithms to find and identify new material and then refer it to a human moderator to confirm whether or not it is indeed child sexual abuse material. About 58% of our members are currently deploying these types of classifiers, and you can see the different types that are being involved. And again, not all of these types of classifiers apply to all of the platforms that our members have. With respect to reporting and then facilitating, not just detecting child sexual abuse material through image-based, hash-based detection or through classifiers, but also taking reports from public, law enforcement, and civil society actors. There's the statistics here on facilitating reporting. And then our members are also increasing their activity on deterrence. So you can see 42% of our members are already, when they sense some sort of potentially harmful conduct online, either by a child exposing themselves to danger or by someone who appears to be seeking to harm a child, are pinging them with direct messages to try and deter them and letting them know of the consequences of their actions. Again, contribution to online safety resources, and then contributions to education, which has been mentioned previously by several of the panelists. In terms of results, these are statistics from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And you'll be hearing from John Sheehan later today in the second panel. Currently, this is a US-based organization. The referrals that go to NCMEC, though, go to over 150 different countries, including those in Europe. And these are when the companies detect child sexual abuse material or illicit activity, they then report it to NCMEC, and then NCMEC is the clearinghouse that reports it out to law enforcement around the world. And our best statistics are from NCMEC. There are also clearinghouses in other locations, but NCMEC is currently the primary clearinghouse. In 2020, last year, our companies in the coalition accounted for 98% of all reports that were provided to NCMEC. And we increased our reporting by over 30%. And I think, yes, that's a result of increased online activity during the pandemic, but I also think it has something to do with the members' increased commitment to using technology and new policies and practices to detect these images and report them immediately. Looking ahead, I think for industry, the priorities will be to continue to invest in research that will inform our activities going forward, to invest in the development of technology that can be used across platforms, not just on one platform, but across platforms to more quickly identify harmful material and harmful conduct and to protect children, to invest in collective action, bringing the different parties together to facilitate dialogue and understanding, and to continue to share and build resources so that we can help smaller companies improve their performance. And lastly, to drive transparency and accountability throughout the entire industry. So I'm super grateful to be with you today, and I look forward to the dialogue that is to come. Thank you all.
Thank you a lot, Sean, for your great contribution. It is clear to me, and it's clear, I'm sure, in many people here in this room that, you know, legislation and self-regulation from companies should go hand in hand here in preventing and protecting children online. So the tech industry is the best placed to find technological solutions to prevent and ensure that children are safe online and they don't experience any forms of violence online. And we will hear more about that as well in the second panel. So it is also primarily a responsibility of the companies themselves to make sure that their networks are not used by the users for illicit and illegal purposes. So thank you so much for that, Sean. So now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. June Lowry Kingston, who is head of unit of the Accessibility and Multilingualism Safer Internet at the G-Connect of the European Commission. And so, June, we've been hearing a lot also about the need of media literacy, and I know that the Commission has been working a lot on that domain as well. So please, June, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emilio, and thank you to the honourable members of the Parliament for both organising and inviting me to this webinar on children's rights in the digital world. So as we've heard, there's a wide range of both opportunities and challenges facing children online. And in recent years, there are many international organisations who focused on children in the digital space. And as we've heard, some of today's speakers have made significant contributions to this work. We've heard about the UN General Comment 25, but there are also the 4 different sets, great approach, of the UN International Telecommunications Union guidelines on online child protection, UNICEF's great manifesto on the governance of child's data, the OECD's recommendation on children in the digital environment, and their revised risk typology, which is very interesting, and the Council of Europe's guidelines and their very timely handbook for policymakers on the same topic. And that's without mentioning this year's G7 Declaration on Internet Safety, the Lisbon Declaration, probably something from the G20 in October. So there is a lot going on in the international level. And then, of course, there is our own work within the European Union. And so turning to that, children's rights are human rights, and every child in Europe and across the world should enjoy the same rights. That's the start of the Commission's first comprehensive strategy on the rights of the child that was adopted this March. And it explicitly mentions an EU where children can safely navigate the digital environment and harness its opportunities. Now, making a Europe fit for the digital age was one of the 6 headline ambitions announced by President von der Leyen for this Commission. And this spring, the Commission's Digital Compass communication set the direction of travel for the digital transformation of Europe by 2030. That was naming this decade as Europe's digital decade. Now, this transformation sets ambitious targets containing skills, we've heard that mentioned already, infrastructure, including access, business and public services. But it also places European rights and values at the heart in a proposed set of digital principles. Now, these principles cover such topics as access to high quality connectivity, to digital education and skills, to accessible and trusted online services. And these are all aspects of the digital transformation of both work and society highlighted by the pandemic. And the principles also refer to the protection and empowerment of children and young people. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is you can still help shape those principles because the public consultation is still open for 3 more days until the 2nd of September. So don't delay to have your say, please. So we may be in this new digital decade, but the Commission has been supporting children in the digital environment for the past 2 decades and even longer. And in 2012, the Commission's European Strategy for a Better Internet for Children, the Better Internet for Kids, or BIC strategy, set a global benchmark, and it's guided and shaped policies in member states and our own actions in the Commission ever since. Through our network of safer internet centres in Europe, we have literally reached millions of children's parents and teachers through our fundraising activities, our helplines and hotlines that we fund, and through the portal betterinternetforkids.eu with its wealth of information and resources for all ages and in many languages. And if you don't know it, please check it out. Now, much of the BIC strategy, which set out to balance protection and empowerment, is still relevant, but it's been complemented by much relevant EU legislation since 2012. For example, the Audiovisual Media Services Directive and the GDPR, which each, as we've heard, have specific sectorial provisions for minors. Other recent relevant initiatives on the Commission side include the EU strategy for a more effective fight against child sexual abuse, which we'll hear about later this afternoon, the strategy on the rights of victims, and the Digital Education Action Plan, which, as Emilio mentioned, focuses on media literacy. And as we've heard, the Council and Parliament are currently discussing 2 important recent Commission legislative proposals. The first ever legal framework on artificial intelligence, which explicitly mentions children's rights. And secondly, the Digital Services Act, with its obligations on the largest, by definition, therefore the most popular platforms, for example, on tackling illegal content and other risks, and its removal of legal ambiguity for those seeking to detect and remove online child sexual abuse material. So the EU landscape has changed since 2012. The international organizations and the international context has changed and taking children's rights and participation much more seriously. And of course, we all know the way that the under 18s themselves use technology has changed dramatically and irreversibly since 2012, from family computer to mobile phone or a tablet strapped to a pushchair. Instead of video games, we have gaming apps and gaming platforms with interactive connectivity and cameras everywhere. And it has been mentioned, the opportunities for young people to self-organize and bring about change via digital tools such as social media are immense, endless, I think MEP Schreinemacher said at the beginning, as we saw with the student strikes for climate change. But as others have mentioned, and I'm glad to see our thinking aligns on this, to the traditional, we could say, online risks of content, contact, and conduct, we surely now must add contractual or commercial risk, as children often use digital products and services that weren't designed with young users in mind, and at younger ages even than they legally should. And the datafication of childhood, whether overzealous sharenting by parents, predictive analytics, persuasive design, commercial profiling, what is already the impact on children's privacy, their health, their well-being, and ultimately their future development as digital adults? How do and how will companies and governments use the unprecedented volume of data that now accompanies virtually every child, in Europe at least, from birth? Will the next big challenge be AI-generated content, or deep fakes, augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality? I very much hope that in 10 years' time, we are not still discussing age verification, as mentioned by Guido so rightly as our first speaker. Now, the international documents I've mentioned and the Commission's different strategies, Rights of the Child, Effective Fight Against CSAM, our Better Internet for Kids strategy, which is the digital arm, if you like, of the Right to the Child strategy, they all share the same goal: to make sure that every child can be respected, protected, and fulfilled in the digital environment, principles we surely all agree on. In 2019, the European Parliament's resolution on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child called for an update of the Better Internet for Kids strategy. That update is now underway with targeted consultations, and it should see the light of the day in 2022. As Baroness Kidron has shown, change is possible. The status quo is not engraved in marble, and actions need to follow the significant words in all the important texts that are framing our considerations. As my unit is indeed penholder in the Commission for the update of the Better Internet for Kids strategy, I am very grateful for this opportunity to benefit from the collective wisdom of the expert speakers gathered together today. I look forward to the recommendations for that update. I've noted those already shared, so that together, and especially calling on industry, member states and the Commission, we can ensure EU leadership and EU values for children in the digital decade or even decades ahead. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, June, for such a comprehensive contribution. Thank you so much as well for the work that you've been doing over these years within the Commission. So now I know we have here with us today as well MEP Adrián Vázquez Lázara, who also serves as the chair of the JURI Committee of the European Parliament, the Committee on Legal Affairs. I know that MEP Vázquez Lázara would like to share some thoughts with us as well. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Well, first of all, I would like to thank the speakers. It's been a privilege to count on the valuable contributions of the experts taking part in these conversations. And I can assure them that the quality and accuracy of our work as legislators is always based and linked to the knowledge of the speakers as them. Also, a special thanks to Liesje and Hilde for the amazing organization, and of course, to all the Renew Group staff for making this webinar possible. As you all know, in order to become a political priority and to be part of the legislative agenda, any issue or problem needs to have a lot of allies in the European Parliament and in the institutions, members with a special commitment to the cause that could foster legislative progress and put pressure on the other members and institutions to achieve some changes. As chair of the JURI committee, I can tell you that both Liesje and Hilde are those kind of members that when it comes to children's rights, because they are a reference on this particular topic. I'm just going to mention their standing work on all the children-related amendments that they have introduced in legislative files, as important as DSA and the MEPs that a lot of the speakers have already mentioned. I'm going to focus very briefly on the JURI committee work when it comes to today's topic, and two fundamental issues that we believe are core to legislate towards ensuring a free and safe digital environment for children. First, I'm talking about timely and efficient removal of illegal online content, and about the need of ensuring effective and appropriate judicial proceedings to deal with children-related cases that they originate in the digital environment. The obstacles that we find to design and implement an effective and adequate notice and takedown mechanism are well known, and the JURI committee was the first committee in the Parliament to particularly address this issue throughout an own initiative report. In that report, what we did is call for a future legislation to establish a general rule: content that has been the subject of a notice shall remain visible while the assessment of its legalities is still pending. And an exception to the rule: content hosting platforms shall act expeditiously to make unavailable or remove content which is manifestly illegal. While this structure needed to clarify by designing objective criteria to determine the meaning of content which is manifestly illegal, the fact is that the Commission proposal does not even introduce this distinction. I'm going to be a little bit specific on this part, because Article 14 does only establish a general obligation for providers of hosting services to process any notices that they receive and to take their decisions in respect of the information to which the notice relates in a timely, diligent, and objective manner. However, I'm confident that this element that at least I find very important will be thoroughly discussed and modified within the trilogues negotiations. And I invite all you to keep an eye on this issue, as the rapid treatment and removal of illegal content affecting children is of utmost importance. Finally, I want also to draw your attention to another important issue, which is not part of the policy debate as much as I believe it should. Whenever judicial intervention is needed to enforce children's rights in the digital environment, the result is the existence of complex court proceedings, which often include hearings for the affected children, or discussions and decisions that will mainly have an impact on their rights. With the aim of making those proceedings as friendly, understandable, and inclusive as possible for children, which I think is one of our goals, the jury committee is currently working in a report of which I am the rapporteur as well, where we will explore areas of improvement to achieve a child-friendly justice, identify best practices of different organizations of member states that will also serve as a model to that improvement. As a result, we expect that this report will call for the adoption of European standards or guidelines for the effective protection of the rights of the child in civil proceedings, and the promotion of a child-friendly perspective in the administration of justice. I want, of course, to encourage all the colleagues and the speakers that are here today with us to follow the work in progress of this text, and to the extent possible to provide the committee with insights and recommendations based on your experience in order to enrich the initiative with a digital perspective. In this regard, I also want to invite you to think in those cases where children's rights need to be judicially enforced, and to share with us your views on how we can improve the resulting judicial proceedings, making them more understandable and friendly for the children, as well as more open to receive the child's views and opinions and to take them into account when issuing a judgment. Thank you very much again for inviting me today, and thank you again to Liesje and to Hilde.
Thank you a lot, MEP Vázquez-Lázara. So now I'd like to thank all the panelists who've been with us today, and I'll ask them to be a little more with us, because I'd like now to open the Q&A session. And so I remind the people who are following online that they can use the chat box on the link so that they can also ask questions and maybe directly address the question to one of our panelists today. I already have few people who have requested speaking time in the Q&A session. I now then give the floor to Miss Larissa Pircalebelu from the legal group. Larissa, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilio. Hello, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for inviting us as well to give a few words. Our special thanks to MEP Schreinemacher as well for organizing such a timely discussion on protecting and empowering children online, and actually recognizing the role of the broader business ecosystem in this discussion. As it has been reflected throughout the panel, it is evident that the current EU discussions and the various digital files offer a great opportunity to reimagine, redesign, and rebuild an exciting European digital future that enables Europe's children and young people to flourish and ensures their well-being. On behalf of the LEGO Group, we would like to respond to one of the questions addressed by this panel and highlight the following two recommendations to policymakers. First is the need for a holistic approach to policy development. For example, one that is based on children's rights and well-being, which will enable and incentivize organizations to deliver positive digital innovation. By positive digital innovation, we mean innovation that will treat children's safety, privacy, and protection as non-negotiable at the design stage. But it will also enable children to access and be empowered by the benefits that technology can generate, which is actually the interdependent relation between protection and access that Dr. Kazova mentioned in her concluding remarks. And this is actually one reflection, if I may, that we shared in light of the EU Digital Services Act, which must include under Article 1, Paragraph 2, the objective to stimulate digital innovation, but again, the type of digital innovation that is designed to respect fundamental rights and especially children's rights and well-being, which then goes back to the remark highlighted by Baroness Kidron on the system design. So it will incentivize that type of system design if it's included in the objectives of the DSA. Second recommendation relates to the monitoring of the impact of digital innovation and the EU's digital transformation on citizens' well-being. This is one of the key recommendations that we've made in our response to the Digital Compass Policy Program consultation, which is one of the instruments under the 2030 Digital Decade file. So specifically there, we spoke about the need to develop and include a societal wellness metric or indicator that will assess the impact of tech and innovation on citizens. And of course, there will be a dedicated and focused methodology and metric for children. We will have, as Ms. Laurie Kingston mentioned, we will have the EU digital principles, which will act as a reference for a human-centric digital transformation. And we thank the Commission services for having already included a child-centric principle. But our recommendation says that we must also monitor as part of the, for example, Digital Economy and Society Index, so what we all know as the DESI system, as well as the European State of the Digital Decade, how digital technology and innovation and the progress towards the different 2030 digital targets, how these contribute to citizens' well-being, with children actively recognized as a distinct group and their unique and evolving needs and capabilities acknowledged. So in conclusion, for us, digital innovation is only one component that impacts children's well-being, an important component, of which the impact can be positive when we anchor children's development needs and their best interest in the design stage, as well as when we monitor and assess on an ongoing basis, how does it actually contribute to children's life, which is where we highlight the importance of the societal wellness indicator. Thank you again for this discussion and looking forward to the discussion either now or in the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larissa, for your contribution. Thank you so much as well for sharing with you the commitment of the LEGO group. Thank you so much for that. So now I know I have another person who has registered to have speaking time in the Q&A, and I see him with us. So I will now then give the floor to Daniel Carterfeld-Winther from UNICEF very own research center, Innocenti. Please, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair, for giving me the floor. Can you hear me well? Excellent. Thank you so much first to the members of Parliament for giving UNICEF an opportunity to speak and for organizing the event. So I work at UNICEF's Office of Research, where I lead the research on children and digital technology. And over the past few years, UNICEF has conducted numerous national research projects about the risks and opportunities that children face online. We've generated evidence with children in more than 30 countries around the world, mostly outside of Europe, often together with Professor Livingstone and the EU Kids Online Network. My remarks foreshadow the next topic of the agenda, really, which is the fight against child sexual abuse on digital platforms and elsewhere. And we're very happy to see that this is being considered, and we look forward to that conversation. UNICEF is currently working with ECBAT International and Interpol on a research project called Disrupting Harm, which is funded by the End Violence Fund. And we have conducted in-depth research in 13 countries in Africa and Asia on how technology facilitates sexual exploitation and abuse of children, and how the national protection systems are responding. And the first report from this 3-year project is coming out in September. And I wanted to highlight 3 important findings from this work that policymakers in the EU may consider as you're working towards a better and safer internet for children and rolling out the new EU strategy. So the first finding is that in our data, we see clear linkages between online and offline abuse of children. And we find that most children who experience abuse in the online environment are also abused offline. And this means that our response needs to be holistic and not only focused on the digital environment. And that reinforces what Baroness Kidron and Professor Livingstone both said, that we need to address these issues horizontally, not in isolation. It would be really interesting to hear from tech industry representatives how they can support with creating that bridge. Second, we find that most sexual abuse that children experience online is perpetrated by people they already know from before. And this has implications for prevention and response, because much of global awareness raising really has focused a lot on stranger danger. But our data suggests that we may actually need to focus more on people already known to the child and what that means for prevention. And third, we find that a large proportion of children who experience sexual abuse online, they don't tell anyone about it. And most often that's because they're either embarrassed and they find it difficult emotionally to talk about, or they don't know where to go or who to tell. And sometimes they feel that no one will believe them anyway. And it's only a very small proportion of children who report this experience to helplines or the police. We can't say whether this is similar in Europe or not, but it would be good to find out so that industry can determine if they need to improve their reporting functions, and so that governments know if they need to strengthen their child protection services. And the latter was mentioned by Dr. Kazova as important for effective implementation of General Comment 25. So this is just a very brief snapshot of some headline findings coming out of our work, but the evidence is proving very useful so far in terms of improving national awareness and response. And this is an area where really we have very limited data still globally, especially evidence coming from children themselves and representing their lived experiences. And so more evidence of this nature, including from Europe, could be really useful. And UNICEF, of course, looks forward to supporting countries in the EU with creating a better internet for children over the coming years. And thank you again for hosting, for organizing, and for giving UNICEF the floor.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Now, I know we have 2 more minutes before I give the floor to Liesje to give the final and concluding remarks. I see here that in the chat box, we received a few questions. So I'm just going to read very quickly one of them and then give the floor to any of the panelists who feel might have an answer to that. So Belgian research, this is coming from Niels van Pemel from Child Focus, Belgium. Belgian research suggests that in 2 years' time, the average age of having a first smartphone dropped from the age 11 to 9 years old. This has a huge impact on how children are facing risks online. For instance, the gut feeling of a 9-year-old compared with an 11-year-old is big and makes children more vulnerable for different forms of online sexual exploitation. How this affect the discussion? Is any of the panelists would like to answer how the different age can then affect the discussion, how we could maybe do a better tailor-made solution for that? Is anyone among the panelists? I see Baroness Kidron. Yes, please, Vivian.
I saw Sonia's hand creeping up, so I'll go very quickly, so maybe we hear from her. I just think that it's a really clear argument for a health and safety approach, a safety by design, a sort of a responsibility of industry towards its end user. And I think that some of the confusion that I referred to earlier around consent has to absolutely leave the playing field of policy discussion so that we can deal with children in evolving capacities. And so if you put a smartphone in the hand of a child of 9, it has to be suitable for a child of 9, not just the phone, but the services that they're accessing. So that would be my comment.
Thank you. If Professor Livingston can make it very quick, because we have to, unfortunately, we need to conclude, please.
Sure. I mean, I think we should expect more of this. I think we should expect children getting access to more digital technologies earlier and earlier, so we need to be prepared, not shocked. Obviously, one question is why? Why are parents considering a 9-year-old needs that service? And we could ask ourselves if there are other ways of delivering, of staying in touch, or other problems the phone is designed to solve. But what I really like about the Child Rights Framework is it encourages children's participation in the digital world, including through technologies as early as they are ready for it, but protection up to 18. And somehow that's what the challenge of safety by design has got to address.
Thank you. Please, Dr. Kazova, please.
Literally one sentence. Also, it's about educating parents, though difficult it is, because this is really a very tricky thing to manage with children evolving capacities, because 9-year-old child already understand a lot. And parents should be very carefully educated, as well as children, of course. But I would focus also on that dimension. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So now I'll give the floor to MEP Schreinemacher, Liesje, so for the concluding remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And yes, I would also like to start with thanking our panelists today. I think Sean said it right when he spoke about a phenomenal panel, and it really was. Thank you for all your contributions here today, but also the work that you have been doing so far when it comes to children's rights online. And we've heard about best practices, things that have already been done, but also and the opportunities that we still have, but also about the challenges. And I think there's broad consensus amongst the panelists, at least, that there has, when it comes to the digital world and children in it, it will be a combination of soft law and hard legislation. I think everyone has spoken about the importance of digital education for children and their parents. I think that was a good comment in the end. Thank you. And also keeping in mind that there has to be a balance between the protection and the access to the internet and to information, and the right to be heard as well for children. Well, as has been mentioned quite a few times, children's rights are human rights. So thank you very much for all these recommendations. Obviously, we did not have a lot of time for discussion, and I would like to invite the panelists, but also the people that have been listening, that if there are things that have not been addressed properly today, or maybe there has not been enough light shed on these issues, please be sure to contact me and my team, because I think we are really on the right path, but we are happy to take everything on board that you would have to say. So again, thank you so much for participating today. And this will certainly not be the last time that we speak of this with this great panel and these great participants. So I look forward to seeing you, I hope, in real life in the future. And I think I can now give the floor to Emilio to hand over the word to Hilde. Yeah, all right. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you a lot, Liesje. Thank you so much for hosting this very interesting panel. And I'm very happy that we can count on your support as we move forward now. Okay, so now we will actually now move on to this panel number 2, to the second panel of today's event, how to boost the EU fight against child sexual abuse and the long-term legislation that the European Commission is going to publish very soon in the next few months. June Lowry Kingston has already given us a sort of a snapshot of what are the different pieces of legislation that have been taken by the European Commission. And so one of that is actually a big part of this is actually the legislation on the fight against child sexual abuse. We will have today with us also many other speakers that will actually give their contribution. And this panel will be also hosted and by MEP Hilde Vautmans, who also serves as co-chair of the Intergroup on Children's Rights. So now I'll give the floor to MEP Vautmans, that I see that is connected with us, for the introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Emilio, and dear colleagues, dear distinguished guests. I would like to start my introduction by wholeheartedly welcoming our speakers of this second panel. Without any doubt, I can say we are in the company of excellent experts who will let us dive into the core challenges in our common fight against child sexual abuse online. In recent years, colleagues, the number of reports of sexual abuse of children online in Europe has increased dramatically. If I tell you the figures, it's from 23,000 reports in 2010 to more than 725,000 in 2019. And this is shocking. And even more so if we know that the lockdown only made things worse, doubling or even tripling the numbers in some countries. About 1 in 5 children in Europe are victims of some form of sexual violence. About 1 in 5 young lives destroyed. We are talking about sexual touching, rape, sexual harassment, grooming, exploitation and prostitution, child sexual abuse, material online sexual extortion. The consequences are detrimental. And if you know that only 1 out of 3 victims look for help, that makes the situation even more dramatic. All of these numbers are just the tip of the iceberg, because the visible is not the reality. A big part of it remains in the dark. The directive aimed at combating and preventing all types of child sexual abuse and exploitation is a unique piece of legislation, as it addresses the major issues in a 36-degree manner, even if does not completely to take into account the changing realities and disturbing trends in the online world. However, I'm extremely worried because no single member state seems to succeed in combating these horrific crimes, not even after 8 years, since they had to transpose it. The Commission opened infringement procedures against 23 member states. And in my eyes, this is really a scandal. As co-chair of the Intergroup of Children's Rights in this House, I have followed very closely the legislative developments to step up this fight against child sexual abuse and exploitation. Already in 2019, we called on the Commission to enhance this important fight. A new strategy clearly identifies a roadmap and lays down concrete legislative steps to make the fight more effective and to reinforce the current legislative framework, including the creation of an EU Centre to combat and prevent child sexual abuse and exploitation. Soon, the Commission will present to us its long-term legislative proposal to fight child sexual abuse online. And I'm very keen to hear from all of you today what this legislation must include. Help us to make this legislation more effective. I'm also eager to hear about best practices from several countries in Europe and beyond. What can we learn from these tools and examples? And how could they feed into the upcoming legislation and the upcoming EU Better Internet Strategy? How can we ensure that children in the EU can move freely and safe on the internet? And what does this require from the current legislative framework, upcoming legislative framework, and the EU Better Strategy? Based on your input and expertise, we want to be able to offer concrete recommendations to the EU Commission. Given the nature of these crimes and the lack of coordination, it is really important to have an EU common and coordinated response to effectively eradicate child sexual abuse and exploitation. Together, we must end impunity and bring perpetrators to justice. We must invest in prevention towards possible offenders, as well as potential victims. We must identify and better assist child victims. Personally, I'm convinced that the creation of an EU Centre to prevent and combat child sexual abuse online would be a major game changer in attaining these goals on a global and coordinated level. It could connect all the existing and essential players, such as law enforcement authorities, NGOs, hotlines, private sector, including telecommunication companies, academy, medical doctors, and so on. Moreover, the Centre could assist the EU member states with the correct implementation of the directive. And with the staggering recent figures of child sexual abuse, we have no time to waste. And therefore, but it's my personal call, I personally call for the EU member states urgently need to implement the current legislation. Let's start with this. Second, the Commission must support and urge them in doing so, and act if they don't, of course. The EU Centre must become reality as soon as possible. And last but not least, the long-term legislation should be comprehensive, clear, and strong when it comes to the obligations of all actors involved. After the temporary derogation of the e-privacy directive, it is time for us all to find an answer to the challenges ahead. This is something we owe our children and future generations. The EU, the world, should be a place where children are safe, both offline and online, without exception. I really wish everyone a fruitful discussions, and I look forward to your presentations and concrete proposals. Thank you for your attention and contributions. Thank you very much for your help in this important fight.
Thank you, Hilde. Thank you, Vautmans, for your wonderful and tireless work in this domain. Thank you so much for your leadership in these issues and for being such a fierce child rights champions in all the legislations and pieces of policies here in the European Union. So now I'd like to actually then give the floor right now to Miss Catherine Boyer-Bulst, who serves as head of unit in the fight against cybercrime and child sexual abuse at the European Commission. So Catherine, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Emilio, and thank you to the honorable members Vautmans and Schreinemacher, to Renew and to the Intergroup for the opportunity to address this important topic. What I will try to do as a basis for our discussion is to set the scene a little bit. As the honorable member has already highlighted, Renew would like to use this exchange for an opportunity to gather feedback and input for the important legislative steps ahead. And I will try to provide a little bit of background on what the plans are and what the reasoning of the Commission has been. So as various participants have already highlighted also on the first panel, the freedom that the internet provides is not without significant risk for users who are less skilled in avoiding the risks that come with those freedoms, in particular, vulnerable users like children. And an area of particular concern for the EU, as the honorable member has highlighted, is the protection of children against child sexual abuse and exploitation. And here, unfortunately, we have seen that the internet plays a very important role in two aspects. First, it allows offenders to approach children online, on social networks or other platforms, on gaming software, and to then push or lure those children into exploitative behaviors on camera, or to trick them into meeting offenders offline, so-called grooming. And secondly, via the internet, offenders also connect with each other online and share images and videos of the child sexual abuse that has taken place offline, as well as tips on approaching and grooming children and basically achieving their aims with children. And evidence shows that unfortunately both has only gotten worse during the pandemic, as the honorable member Vautmans has already mentioned. So the online services, social networks and platforms that provide the space for all users, including children, to interact, play a key role here. And I will come back to this shortly. But it is clear that we need to improve in all areas, in prevention, in support to investigations where we cannot prevent, and in assistance to victims and survivors. So what can the Commission do in this context? As the honorable MEP highlighted, last year, the Commission published a comprehensive EU strategy for a more effective fight against child sexual abuse. It sets out 8 specific initiatives to fight against these crimes online and offline, and I want to focus on the most relevant ones for today's discussion here. First, we want to prevent child sexual abuse wherever possible, and June on the last panel has already set out some initiatives that the Commission is undertaking in this respect. In addition, we're also developing a prevention network composed of experts in the field and of practitioners to exchange best practice and to develop an evidence-based approach. We're also providing a lot of funding for national and cross-border initiatives, and in the last 10 years alone, just from the DG Home supervised budget, we have spent 45 million euros on projects to better support prevention and detection of child sexual abuse. This is in addition to the funding that we have provided inter alia to the InHope network of hotlines. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly for today, we need to put the right legislative framework in place to prevent child sexual abuse, but also to detect it where we cannot prevent it. And I want to share with you 3 points on that today. First, we already have a child sexual abuse directive in place, as the honorable MEP mentioned, which harmonizes the criminal law across the member states of the EU. And that is an important tool for cooperation between member states and Europol in investigations and prosecution. And the Commission has taken this very seriously and has made sure within the powers of its discretion that the directive is really implemented 100%. And as a result of this commitment, we have indeed launched infringement proceedings against most member states and are working with member states to finalize implementation, which for many member states concerns smaller aspects of the directive, but nonetheless is key to make sure that we really exploit its full value and that we fully see eye to eye on what should be criminal behavior and how to tackle it in all the member states. We've seen important progress over the last years, and I'm confident that we will get there shortly. But criminal law alone is not the solution. So secondly, as I alluded to before, the online service providers play a key role here. Often it is only them who have a window of visibility into the horrors that children face offline and online when they are sexually abused. While we know that the vast majority of child sexual abuse takes place in the sphere of confidence, of comfort of the child, and is actually done by offenders that are very close to the child offline, those offenders then frequently feel a need to document their horrific deeds and to share this with others online, also in exchange for other images of abuse performed by others. And so, unfortunately, online service providers often are the only ones who can help. As the MEP has already highlighted, victims are often extremely reluctant to seek help because some are too young to do so and others do not fully comprehend what is happening to them. So because of this, just last month, the European Parliament and the Council of the EU adopted legislation that enables online service providers to detect on a voluntary basis child sexual abuse on their services, in particular when it comes to images that are being exchanged across chat platforms between offenders. That is the so-called temporary derogation. And now, in a next step later this year, the Commission will propose the necessary legislation to tackle child sexual abuse more effectively in the longer term. This will eventually also replace the temporary derogation just adopted. And this proposal will likely also include, in an important difference from the temporary derogation, targeted obligations for companies to detect and report child sexual abuse material to public authorities. And this is based on the realization that voluntary action has indeed shown its merits where companies have engaged, and we very much applaud those who have. However, we have seen that preventing the dissemination and circulation of known child sexual abuse material requires a much more systematic and targeted approach. And there's two reasons I want to highlight here. First of all, voluntary action strongly varies across companies and across online service providers. Some service providers take very comprehensive action, and you will hear from some of them later today, and some do not take any action at all. And just to highlight this with the figures, 95% of reports of child sexual abuse materials received last year came from only one company. That means for all the rest of online service providers, only 5% of reports to NECMEC came from them. Secondly, the current action lacks harmonized safeguards and transparency, and then sometimes it's being held against the very companies that are doing what they can to protect children. So it's unclear which tools are used or which procedures are in place, for example, to limit the number of false positives. And that can interfere with users' rights, but also result in a less effective action against perpetrators. And as the MEP Vautmans has highlighted, we are also looking into establishing an EU center to prevent and combat child sexual abuse as part of this new legislative proposal, and also as called for by the European Parliament in 2019 in its resolution on children's rights. We see that center as a fundamental component of the proposal, bringing together the online and offline aspects of the fight against child sexual abuse. You will shortly hear also about the role of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the US, And we hope that we can approximate some of its benefits also for the EU setting. And maybe as a third and final point, we need to do better on victim support. And here also we see a strong role for a possible center. We now see that child sexual abuse, unfortunately, often has a lifelong impact on survivors. And to name just one aspect that survivors often struggle with, it's the uncontrolled online dissemination of images and videos depicting their abuse, even years after they've been rescued. And we need to give survivors a possibility to tackle this, not leave them alone with it. And we would want the possible EU center to support victims in doing so. So to conclude, our approach is really to take a holistic view in the fight against child sexual abuse. This means not only supporting our law enforcement or focusing on online service providers, but really taking steps to improve efforts on prevention and assistance to victims in parallel. And such a comprehensive approach is only possible if we tackle the online and offline sides of this crime together. So we see the upcoming proposal as an opportunity to make a significant, long-lasting positive change in the fight against child sexual abuse in the EU and globally, given the cross-border nature of the crime. Now, the European Parliament is a key partner in this process, and we have closely consulted with EP staffers as part of the preparation of this proposal, including in March, and have conducted general and targeted consultations. And we very much welcome the opportunity for this exchange today. We recognize that this is an extremely difficult issue, which is often pitched as trading users' privacy for child protection. Now, we firmly believe that both can be achieved, and I look forward to continuing our excellent cooperation exchange today. I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for this comprehensive overview of the different initiatives that the Commission has been taking, strategy and the legislative proposals that you've been mentioning. Thank you so much as well for the wonderful cooperation that we enjoy with the Commission. It's actually very good today that we have such a very interesting lineup of speakers which reflect the diversity and the complexity of this ecosystem. So I'll now then give the floor to John Sheehan, who is here, as Catherine said, representing the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. John is the Vice President of the Exploited Children Division at the NECMEC. Please, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emilio, and good afternoon or good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Sheehan, as introduced. I'm a Vice President at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and I'm here today to share some current trends, a little scope of the issue, as well as some recommendations that the EU can consider as they're boosting the fight against child sexual exploitation. Let's just get right into some numbers. You know, on the screen here, what you'll see is a total number of reports each year, as well as number of files that are being reported into the cyber tip line year by year. And you might wonder, why are there so many reports? Well, when an electronic service provider becomes aware of child sexual abuse material on their platform, they're required by law to report that into the cyber tip line. And, you know, this law, 18 United States Code 2258A, in my opinion, is one of the most significant child protection laws that's ever been created. You know, this law covers much more than just reporting into the cyber tip line when companies become aware of child sexual abuse material on their platforms. It also contains a 90-day preservation requirement that the companies must hold that information after submitting a report into the tip line. And in an effort to further reduce the amount of child sexual abuse material online, this law also authorizes NECMEC to share elements of cyber tip line reports with the ESPs. So that's where Congress has authorized NECMEC to share hash values with the industry and other data elements. You know, today there are more than 1,700 companies that have access to report into the cyber tip line, more than 50 of which are in Europe that are voluntarily using the cyber tip line as that global mechanism to share information. And the cyber tip line truly has turned into a global clearinghouse for information, especially when you look up at the makeup of the US companies and those that are reporting into it. Last year alone, those 21 million reports that you see on the screen, 94% of those involved individuals outside of the United States that were either grooming children to produce sexually explicit content or actually were trading sexually abusive images of children. So NCMEC has really grown into this global clearinghouse of information regarding child sexual exploitation. We make this information available not just to domestic law enforcement, but to more than 135 countries and territories all around the world. And Interpol also shares information with any of those other countries that aren't covered within that 135. If you're interested in knowing a breakdown of who's submitting these reports, a company by company activity report, or which countries are receiving all of these cyber tip line reports, we publish it on our website. You can go to cybertipline.org. If you scroll down to the middle of the page, there's a tab called By the Numbers, and you can find both 2019 and 2020, the number of reports submitted by the companies and the countries that we made those reports available to. Now, while we're seeing significant reporting into the cyber tip line for 2021, I do want to point out that there's some ripple effects that still exist from the e-privacy directive that are ongoing. As you know, some companies stopped scanning for child sexual abuse material and the online enticement of children for sexual acts in December of last year. And even after a resolution was found this year, some of those companies have been slow to start back up again. And this has created what I'll call an unintended consequence, because you can see here 76%, there's been a decrease, 76% decrease in cyber tip line reports involving the EU this year compared to the same time period last year. So while the rest of the world is seeing just as many cyber tip line reports this year from NCMEC, the EU countries are not. And while we're talking about data, let's look at 2019 and 2020 a little bit deeper. While it is true, the vast majority of reports coming into the cyber tip line are regarding child sexual abuse material. You can see there at the top of that graphic. I'd also like to draw your attention to the online enticement of children for sexual acts, as well as child sex trafficking and child molestation. But both members of the public and a handful of ESPs, these companies, are actively reporting online enticement, also known as grooming, to the cyber tip line. And not a week goes by that we don't have victims, survivors, their parents reaching out to the cyber tip line and asking for help in getting their abusive imagery removed from the internet. You know, most of these contacts to NCMEC involve youth who have self-produced these sexually explicit imagery. And there's just so much more that we can be doing for victims and survivors, not just in the US, but Europe as well. And in NCMEC, we have plans underway to model the UK's Report Remove initiative. We think that's just fantastic. And we're also going to launch a web crawler in 2022, all just in an effort to do more for survivors. And I feel strongly about the topic of providing greater services to survivors because, again, we're seeing these cases firsthand within the cyber tip line. When COVID struck in early 2020, child predators, they knew this was going to be their opportunity to entice youth to produce sexually explicit content. On the right hand of the screen here, you can see some commentary that was posted in a tour board around May of 2020. Those comments have only continued, and they're still going on to this day. And then to the left, you're seeing the number of online enticement reports that are being submitted since 2019. It's just continuing to increase. You know, online enticement, especially the youth-produced, self-generated pornographic images, it's one of the most significant growing trends and issues that we're seeing within the cyber tip line. We need more public awareness on this issue, and we need to see more attention on this within the tech companies. It's great that Microsoft has created a grooming classifier, but we need to get more and more companies to actively be looking for this type of material and reporting it. I am really encouraged that the providers have invested and developed some of these tools to protect children, but really we need more than a couple dozen companies that are out there focused on this issue. And mentioning public awareness, a constant challenge that really is far too often overlooked is ensuring that children and caregivers are provided with free online safety education. And those materials have to be culturally competent, data-driven, age-appropriate, and consistently updated to reflect the most current challenges that children are facing online. I think there's also an opportunity for companies around the world to voluntarily utilize NCMEC CSAM hash list. You know, our organization has put significant resources into these lists that we provide to industry. I'm especially proud of the growth of the hash list over the past year and a half, especially when you think of all the challenges related to COVID and staffing and the such. You know, just look at the growth of our CSAM hash list since 2019. We've got a 3-person review and approval process that ensures that NCMEC's providing one of the world's most trusted CSAM hash lists, and it's available free of charge. Take a look at the videos that are on there. We went from 2019, 20,000 CSAM videos on our hash list to over 419,000. That hash list, that video hash list specifically, is just going to continue to grow. That we're utilizing tools like Videntifier's technology to visually isolate unique imagery and videos. I know that I'm coming a little tight on time here, so I'll start to wrap up. You know, NCMEC does have a few recommendations as the EU seeks to boost the fight against child sexual exploitation. First, while major companies are engaging in tremendous voluntary efforts to detect, report, and remove child sexual abuse material, a majority of the companies do not. Given the increased global proliferation of child sexual exploitation content online, NCMEC recommends that the EU consider adopting some form of mandatory reporting for ESPs to ensure that all ESPs are engaged in basic steps to report child sexual abuse content when they become aware of it. We also recommend that the EU consider ensuring availability of ESPs to use technology to detect and report child sexual abuse material. This legal authority should not just include technology like photo DNA, but it should also recognize artificial learning and machine learning and other tools that can be used to detect both the grooming and online enticement of children for sexual acts, as well as new images of child sexual abuse material. So in closing, on behalf of NCMEC, I really want to thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to any questions that may arise as part of this panel and really future opportunities for NCMEC to work with the members of Renew Europe to help eliminate child sexual exploitation.
Thank you, John, for your comprehensive presentation, to also unfortunately share with us an accurate picture, yet very, very alarming picture of the current trends that you guys are experiencing. And thank you as well also at the end to give concrete recommendation to the members of the Renew Europe group as we move forwards with the pieces of legislation here in the European Union. Thank you so much for that, John. So now I'd like to give the floor to Signe Andersson, who serves as Associate Executive Director at the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Signe, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emilio. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, okay, wonderful. So thank you to the honorable members of Parliament for the opportunity to share some of the things that are happening within the Canadian context at the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. I am the Associate Executive Director, and it's a pleasure to be here to talk about some of the initiatives we're working on. So I'm going to share my presentation. So just briefly, we are a Canadian charitable organization. We have been around since 1985, and our mission and mandate really is to increase the personal safety of children and reduce child victimization. Over the last, I'd say, 6 years as an organization, we have focused heavily on two main pillars. One is reducing the availability of child sexual abuse material on the internet, recognizing we are facing an epidemic in relation to that, and I'll speak about what we're doing through Project Arachnid. As well, we have put a concerted effort towards working with survivors, looking at the gaps that exist and trying to fill some of the areas that have been so desperately needed in relation to a population that has been seen essentially for decades, but rarely heard from. So I'm going to really focus on those two areas, as well as some of the challenges and just a very high level recommendation to the European Union. So in terms of Project Arachnid, it's really, it started back in 2016 as a pilot and then kicked off in January of 2017. And essentially, it's a tool set that's designed to reduce the availability of child sexual abuse material. It is not a law enforcement tool. This is not about identifying and arresting people, although of course that can happen, and there are areas for law enforcement to be able to utilize some of the information within Arachnid, but essentially it is a victim-focused solution. It was designed around the idea that we had generations of survivors that had been living with their material being freely traded online and not a lot being done about its availability. So it essentially evolved into a global tool where we send notices to providers around the world. And it really is a data source that for the first time exposed the scope of this global epidemic. So most recently, we issued our first transparency report on the availability of child sexual abuse material. It was basically a 3-year analysis of the data within Arachnid, and it pointed to some pretty significant problems. Our intention is to be running that report, if not annually, but possibly twice a year. So overall, in terms of the stats, 129 billion images we have crawled. So it's basically looking for the needle in the haystack tied to known images of child sexual abuse material. We have detected 41 million plus images of suspected CSAM, so it crawls off of using photo DNA. So that then comes back into the system. If it's not an exact match, then analysts have to put eyes on that. In about 4.5 years, we have issued close to 8.5 million removal notices to hosting providers. And we're basically facing a backlog of 35+ million images. So Arachnid is detecting content at a greater capacity than we can obviously get through it. That speaks to the enormity of the issue and really the need for all of us globally to be working together on tackling this pervasive problem. At a very, very high level in terms of responses to notices, the top 10% would remove in under 1 day. Top 50%, 3.5 days, bottom 25+ days. I don't think anyone watching this would believe that that's acceptable. Certainly we have those providers that do remove immediately, but we have many that take quite a bit of time and some that completely ignore notices. So in terms of some of the challenges that we have been facing and things that really have come to the surface for us over the last number of years, which also feeds into some legislative initiatives that are desperately needed around the globe. We have really focused online on this notion of what is illegal and in relation to this space versus what is removable. And that has come at a cost to children because there are countless images that are associated with child sexual abuse material that do not meet a criminal threshold. So offenders may take a video, they may splice that video, create individualized images. At the front end of that video, the child is clothed. Those images appear online. The offending community knows everything about these children and their series. So these are still coveted images, and the harm that occurs to children is enormous. So the idea, though, that that can't be removed, as an organization, we really do believe is completely missing the mark. So we do now send terms of service removal notices, and we're having quite a bit of success actually with companies removing that. The ones that are taking this issue very seriously and are very good at removing notices involving child sexual abuse material are becoming very responsive to our terms of service removal notices as well, where we're saying it's connected to an identified victim. But there are still plenty of companies that aren't even a part of this discussion. Certainly, we have big tech at the table doing a lot of important things, but that is only a sliver of those that exist within the ecosystem. So that moves into the second point, which was really highlighted in our Project Arachnid report that was issued just a few months ago. In terms of proactive detection, it's not happening. So nearly 50% of all media that was triggered for the issuance of removal through Arachnid had previously been flagged to that same electronic service provider. So what that tells you is that they are not utilizing proactive detection on known material. And, you know, when you talk about the survivor groups that we work with, like the Phoenix 11, you've got survivors who for 20 years have had to live with the resurfacing of their imagery. And these companies know about it. They're allowing it to be, to resurface on their platform and only doing something at the point in time that they are notified of that. That is wholeheartedly unacceptable, surrounding us adequately protecting children and doing what's right for survivors. So in our view, this is a space that desperately needs to be legislated across the board. In terms of the second pillar and how we're working with survivors, we've been doing a tremendous amount in this space for about 5 years now. We are working with survivor groups such as the Phoenix 11, the Chicago Males, the Aramid Collective. The Aramid Collective is a very interesting group. They're a group of younger, early 20s. They're not terrified by technology, but technology has been a part of what has impacted them as survivors. Their abuse was recorded and shared online, but they're prepared to go online anonymously and fight for what is right. So that is another group that we've recently become connected to. We have survivors reaching into us on a regular basis. A lot of that has to do with Project Arachnid and our ability to disrupt the availability of their abusive material. So through that avenue and through our ongoing connections, not only with the survivor groups, but individual survivors reaching into us, we are assisting them with issues related to restitution. We assist them with completing victim compensation applications, which can be a very complex process. If you have been facing any form of trauma, whether you're the child, whether you're the non-offending parent, this can be a very complex thing to work your way through. And as an organization, we step in to assist them with something that can be completely overwhelming. Victim impact statements have been tremendous here in Canada. Australia, New Zealand, the EU, many have come into us asking about this model. So essentially it's the recording from a survivor, and if their imagery appears in offenders collection, then their recorded impact statement can be presented before the courts. This is having a tremendous impact on how our criminal justice system is viewing the impact of the availability and the sharing of child sexual abuse material online. There's also supporting it with registration and navigating the parole process, which again can be very terrifying when an offender may be released, how to manage that within the family. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, coming into us to actually request the removal of their child sexual abuse material or related imagery, and getting that information into Arachnid. And there are other aspects related to finding the right therapist, all of those supports that are needed behind the scenes in the aftermath of child sexual abuse material, because as Catherine noted in her opening remarks, there are lifelong impacts associated with the ongoing availability of this abusive material. Finally, I'll finish off by saying that, you know, I heard on the first panel, this was discussed a tremendous amount, but, you know, it's very disheartening when it comes to this entire discussion around privacy. We don't speak enough about the privacy rights of children. We don't speak enough about the privacy rights of adult survivors whose child sexual abuse material continues to be traded online ad nausea, really. So, you know, and the idea too that it's one or the other is incredibly short-sighted. I think it's also purposeful. You know, you polarize the debate, you make it really extreme, and then everyone is terrified that suddenly companies are looking at everything that they have on their devices. And it's just absolutely nonsensical. So there needs to be the opportunity to obviously protect privacy rights, and included within that are the privacy rights of survivors. I would also finally add that we are seeing, you know, 7-year-olds on Omegle being recorded over live stream, inserting objects into their vaginas at the instruction of offenders. They have no idea what they're doing is sexual in nature. We have to ask ourselves how we have really allowed this to occur for children. This has nothing to do with parents being on top of things. It's impossible for parents to be on top of things as it relates to the online world. Companies have an obligation to set up platforms that are safe for children from the get-go. This type of access to children and the harm that's occurring, the kids don't even know is happening to them, is the state of the nation right now. And we desperately need things to change, and we desperately need governments to step in, legislate, and intervene on behalf of the most vulnerable of our population. So I thank you for the opportunity to present to the group, and I will turn the floor back over to Emilio.
Thank you so much, Signe, for such a powerful contribution. Thank you so much as well for shifting a bit the center of the attention when we talk about protection of children's rights. It's actually children's privacy that should be our primary concern. So thank you so much for saying that, and thank you so much as well for also, shedding some light on the fact that the data protection and privacy rights and protection of children's rights, they can absolutely go hand in hand. And thank you particularly as well for the wonderful work done by the Canadian Center for Child Protection and the victim-centered approach, and the wonderful work that you guys do with the support, the survivor groups, with individual victims as well. I'm sure this can be absolutely used as a best practice example for many other organizations to follow here in Europe and elsewhere in the world. So thank you so much for that, Signe.
Emilio, we lost you. We can't hear you. Sorry.
You muted
Sorry,
yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, sorry. I was just saying that I would like to give the floor to Miss Arda Gerkens, who's the director. And I was saying, please, Arda, allow me not to pronounce it very well, because I'm not going to be able to pronounce it very well in Dutch, but I'm going to just say the acronym. So EOKM, which is the Dutch hotline, which is also part of the international network of hotlines. So Arda, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm trying to share my screen, if that is working. Let's see if that works. Just a moment. Because you're right, EOKM is a difficult name. Okay, so the sharing doesn't work. I'll do it by heart if you don't mind. So thank you for presenting, Emilio. And indeed, EOKM it's a terrible abbreviation of the Dutch Expertise Bureau of Online Child Abuse, which of course, it's not the best name in the world, but we have to do with it for now. Basically, we have 3 programs fighting online child sexual abuse. The first being the hotline as part of InHope. We also have a helpline that offers first aid to victims of online child sexual abuse up until 27 years of age, actually. And we have a helpline for potential perpetrators and their environment called Stop It Now. So just to give you some figures, we've analyzed over 300,000 illegal images last year. I'd like to make a side note to what John said. The figures, and also actually Ms. Vautmans. In the beginning, we talk about numbers, but we need to understand that it doesn't mean it's every single image is an individual image. Many of them are reshared over and over again. So it doesn't say anything about the volume or about the amount of victims, but about the volume. We've helped about over 6,000 young people who came to us for advice, which is still the tip of the iceberg. And we've offered support to over 600 persons who reached out to us on online child abuse. Now, for the hotline, we also have tools like the hashtag server, which is a proactive detection by ISPs, 5 million hits on no CSAM images in 2020. And we have a tool which is called Libra, which is a tool that searches for known CSAM images, but also unknown CSAM images on unidentified places. So it searches on places where we haven't been before. And for instance, this is just a proof of concept, just finished the first round. We detected over 45,000 images on one unknown website in the EU containing mainly boys, which was kind of shocking for us because mostly we see the girls, which is actually quite logical because we use the known images and mainly girls are in there. But if we want to solve this problem, we need to know the origin of the material. And some of them have, if you have already spoken about it, of course, we have the recorded hands-on child abuse, which I think indeed we need to address also in the EU, but this needs to be solved offline. And that doesn't fall under my responsibility, well, depending on how you look at that word. But mainly we see the secretly recorded online sexual acts. Signy just spoke about it, Omegle, chat roulette. We need to understand this starts from a very young age, as young as 5, 6 years old. And I kind of tend to disagree with you there, Signy, because I think that there's also responsibility of the parents, but they need to be educated, as been said also already, because they have no idea that this is happening. We also have, of course, the voluntarily sent images that then leak for several reasons. But we also see boys and girls are being pressured or extorted to send images or even more images. And then we have the hacked phones, the hacked clouds, or the hacked social media where images are taken out of. So at helpwanted.nl, we support the young people who have been a victim of the above. And we need to understand that 50% of the victims that we get, 50% are boys. We always talk about the girls, but many boys are being a victim of this abuse. Now, what is this material used for? They're used to enter CSAM networks on the dark web, but of course, a lot of it's being spread in networks or chat apps. The spreading on porn sites, and a lot of material is being used to extort children, either financially. We have a report on that. On boys, financial extortion is mainly done on boys. They pay about average 600 to 700 euros every time they're extorted. And please mind you, there are people who don't pay anything, and some of them pay thousands of guilders. Of course, there's sexual extortion. Unfortunately, this happens to girls, and they end up to being prostituted. And what we also see is they're being extorted for criminal activities, so for money laundering or to open bank accounts or stuff like that. So it's a very easy tool for criminals to use. So we talk about the victims here, we talk about the tools we have. There's a big elephant in this room, and these are the perpetrators. So I'd like to talk to you about the perpetrators. We talk about people with sexual interest in minors, but actually that's the minority of the group that perpetrate. Study shows that hands-on delicts are done by 80% of people who do not have a sexual interest in minors. And CSAM viewers only have 40% of sexual interest at the latest figures. So the group, people without sexual interest in minors, is much bigger. We need to understand that there's also a really growing group, and we've seen with several helplines for perpetrators this happening, of peers. So these are kids who started to view CSAM when they were 14, 15 years old, which is quite logical and normal, because if you're sexually interested and you're 14 years, you don't search for women who are 30 because you look at your own normal age, not realizing that this is abuse material. Unfortunately, we see a lot of young people who are driven by boredom and also driven by social media triggers to see how far they can go. We had this situation in the Netherlands where a very famous actor, Bilal Wahib, was in a live stream with his fans, and he asked one of the guys, show your private parts. If you show your private part, I'll give you 10,000 euros or 20,000 euros or something. And the kid, 12 years old, did so. So thousands of people viewed that one. And of course, that video went online. This was a really big case. Both of the perpetrator, Bilal Wahib, his career is over, but the guy is now in therapy for what happened to him. And we need to understand that we, hopefully not us, but we, the people, are a main element in spreading of this material, because we spread what we receive, sometimes out of very good intentions. Look what I've got, but we spread it, and thus we are part of the problem. So what we do is we offer help, anonymous help to perpetrators, by phone, by chat. And we also advertise on porn sites to trigger, why are men looking for teens? Why do we even have teens on porn sites? It kind of gives the suggestion that a teen is okay. And I don't have the time, but I'd love to go into the whole fact that it is strange that it's like, drinking beer. It's illegal to do it under 18, or I believe in the States 21. But once you're that age, you can drink as much as you like whenever you want. So, but we all know that 16 years old also drink beers, don't we? So why wouldn't they have sex? So if we want to look at how to end child sexual abuse, first of all, I really need to emphasize, and I know it's difficult in the world, but we need to talk about sex. We don't talk about sex with our children. We don't think about the fact that 6-year-olds and 5-year-olds, they have a sexual interest. It's the human body. It starts from the moment you're born. So you have to guide your child into that sexual world. And there are new challenges with the internet. We also have to accept that children do experiment online, and thus we need to educate them as well as their parents. This is happening. It is happening now. And so it will happen. And there'll be situations in which they wish they'd done otherwise. And we need to deal with that. Also important not to create any new perpetrators. We need to clean up the web as soon as we can without any delay. So I'm very much proactive search, try to find, prevent it from coming online. That also prevents perpetrators being triggered by images. And we need to cooperate with private sector, but I think enough's been said about that. We need to reach out to the key actors who are spreading the material. And the key actors are, your children. We have the discussion at the table, at the dinner table, asking them, don't send nude pictures, or did you ever send a nude? But we never ask them, did you receive one? And what did you do when you received one? We need to really emphasize and learn on children that. And we need to offer prevention programs to the broad group of the viewers of CSAM. Everybody's talking about pedophiles. It's the minority. There's a much broader group, and we need to address all of them. And these activities need to be supported by technical solutions, which are on top, respect children's rights, and can be used by all parties involved. I think it's good to have a program to end victim blaming, because victim blaming is the reason why children are not coming forward when this happens. I think it's been said by the Sir of UNICEF. Indeed, the minority doesn't report, not because of the shame, because of the fact they blame it on themselves. Every conversation, every single conversation that we have with a victim starts with, I've been very stupid. I did a stupid thing. Of course, it's my mistake. No, it's not. You were abused in a very bad way. I really think we need to look at the mandatory reporting. In which way do we, what goal do we have to have? Do we have to have the reporting in itself? It might even overflood our police systems. So what do you want with mandatory reporting? What's the goal, and how should we use it? It doesn't always solve the problem. It sometimes adds to the problem. I know for a fact that the amount of reports of NECMEC kind of overflooded my police force in the Netherlands, not them being not able to pick up other cases. And of course, I'm going to say it here out loud, we need funding, funding, funding. And certainly the hotlines need funding. We just don't have enough funding to do whatever we want. So to end up with some food for thought, tailor-made solutions we need to fit to the variety of online abuse. We need more research to know what we're dealing with. And I think that's really important. And although technical tools can help to clean up the web, they will not solve the problem of production and the spreading. And even these tools can harm the child's privacy and create also a fake feeling of safety. I do agree with you, Signy. There's a balance, and we need to find that one. The sharing is the problem. I can't say that it's not the image, it's the sharing of the image that's the problem, and we need to change that narrative. And as always, unfortunately, prevention has a low priority, but it should be on top. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Arda, for your contribution. Thank you as well for mentioning the importance on sex extortion, which, by the way, has been included as well in the latest European Parliament report on the Directive 2011 that also Catherine was mentioning at the beginning. Of course, in 2018, we were not experiencing this phenomenon. Unfortunately, as well, sex extortion involves much and much more people of minorities, migrants, people that are even much more vulnerable to this kind of crimes. Unfortunately, I just wanted to say very quickly that I understand that, of course, a lot of work has to be done offline, but as has been said as well in the first panel, everything that happens online has clear and real repercussion in real life as well. As the example of Signy was saying about the girl that is invited on a chat and on a video, and then she's asked to do certain things. Yeah, this is happening online, but it's also happening in real life. So just wanted to clarify that often we make this differentiation offline and online, and I think unfortunately nowadays the two things go hand in hand and together. Thank you so much for that, Arda. So now I'd like to give the floor to Miss Sarah Gardner, who's the Vice President of External Affairs for Thorn. Thorn has been wonderful, has been working very much with us, and is a name in this ecosystem. So I'm very happy to have Sarah with us today. Sarah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emilio. And I also just want to say thank you to the honorable member and the Renew Group for hosting this conversation and for allowing us to be a part of this conversation with such esteemed colleagues. You all have done such a tremendous job of outlining the scale and scope of the challenge that we face. And so I'm going to try and keep my comments to pieces that are additive to the conversation at this point, because you all have done such a wonderful job of painting the picture of what we're really up against when we talk about combating child sexual abuse online. But as Emilio said, my name is Sarah Gardner. I'm the VP of External Affairs at Thorn. We are an independent US-based nonprofit that builds technology to combat online child sexual abuse. And the makeup of our team demonstrates our commitment to building technology and innovation. So we're about 100 people, more than half of which are engineers, data science, and product people. Again, with the goal of how do we continue to innovate and actually build the technology that this entire ecosystem needs to combat this problem in an effective way. The three core pillars of our work include building technology to assist law enforcement in victim identification. We also equip industry with the tools that they need to identify, report, and remove this content. I thought the comments about industry needing to be more proactive is spot on. And in certain instances, younger companies actually need the technology to do this more effectively. And so we want to be able to provide that at scale. And we also lead cutting edge research in regards to how do we build a more resilient youth online to combat the growing problem of self-generated content, of which, Emilio, I thought you just did a really nice job of summarizing that. That includes so many types of victims. How do we do more research to understand? And Arda, your comments about not asking youth, this is really important. And this is work that we've just recently started at Thorn. We've conducted 2 studies in the US asking youth themselves, what is their interaction online like? Where do they need more help? What is actually happening out in the wild, so to speak? And it's really interesting to see that data and understand the normalization around sending nudes is real, and a shift that is happening in these communities where if we're not speaking the same language as the kids in these environments, we may miss opportunities to create positive intervention and sort of change the outcome, if you will, of oftentimes what can be a very innocent exchange or mistake that a child makes. So thinking about, you know, what's additive to the conversation at this point, given that all of you have done such a marvelous job of painting the picture, I think I wanted to highlight that, you know, the one thing we know is constant is that technology will change, and it will change quickly. We have to be able to innovate in this space, and figuring out a way to do that where we can quickly deploy new technologies in a transparent way will be key. You know, we've spent a lot of today talking about hash matching or image identification. You know, John Sheehan showed the slide of video. We still don't have completely viable video hashing technology out there. And so that's the current state. So what we also need to be thinking about, what is coming down the pipe from an innovation and a technology standpoint, so that 10 years from now, we're not having this same conversation about technologies that entered into the environment over the next few years that we were unprepared for. And I think that is where we would love to provide more assistance and information on what those technologies look like, and how do we actually start to prepare for the way that the ecosystem will change over time. We also saw people refer to the fact that the predators and perpetrators know what's coming. So they are deeply invested in continuing to evade law enforcement. And so they are all over looking at what innovative technology they can use. And so the farther we fall behind, in terms of protecting children online moving forward. And I know, John, you also showed that conversation out of the dark web. We also hear from our law enforcement partners directly that when companies make changes and start to say, oh, we're looking over here, we're looking over there, there is a flurry of activity that happens in those communities with people warning each other and saying, be careful, you need to change your system, or don't download this or download that. So understanding how to balance both the transparency of how companies can detect this content with knowing that it's all being watched, unfortunately, by those who are often abusing kids in the worst way, is a hard thing to hold, but something that we have to try and balance. In terms of recommendations and considerations, as the Commission considers the long-term legislation, you know, I couldn't agree more with the comments that have already been said about trying to change the conversation about a trade-off happening between privacy and child protection. In fact, we were recently part of an interview where the interviewee set up, okay, there's two sides of the debate. There's child advocates over here and privacy advocates over there. And we actually said from the get-go, we completely disagree with that description of the conversation. We consider ourselves privacy advocates. And so we need to completely change the way that conversation is being presented as a trade-off conversation. And also to the comments that of so many of my colleagues before as well, when we talk about privacy, we think of it as privacy for all, including the privacy of the children in these images and videos. The fact that they do not have the recourse to be able to know that no one is taking pleasure in their abuse for the rest of their life is, you know, an incredible burden to carry. And the least that we can do is look them in the eye and say that we are doing everything in our power to ensure that we are protecting their privacy, and that the worst moment of their life isn't being spread around the internet forever. So that is something that, a sentiment that many of you have shared that we could not agree with more. And so I think in terms of how that translates into the actual future legislation, we're looking for that legal certainty for service providers that they can continue to detect known and unknown child sexual abuse material, as well as how we will tackle things like live streaming, grooming, etc. Some of you have also mentioned, kids putting the onus on children to be able to navigate when something like this is happening to them online. Right now, we are putting very much the burden on the kids themselves, Signe, to your point, to be able to identify that they are being abused, even as young as 5, 6, 7, and potentially tell someone and get help. Coming out of the research that we've conducted here in the United States, one of the saddest data points was that about 35% of children said that if this were to happen to them, where they took a self-generated image that then they shared and someone shared it with others or it started to spread, they would tell a parent or a trusted person, an adult in their life. And yet when it happened, only 6% actually did. And so this point around shame and blame is absolutely true, and understanding how we can give children better recourse when something like this happens, and honestly, better support to navigate their way out of it. I also wanted to stress, we often say at Thorn, different solutions for different companies. I think we're going to hear from Facebook next. It's very different to ask a Facebook or a Microsoft or a Google or an Apple to do this at scale versus a small startup who has a tiny engineering team and often doesn't have the resource to commit to this problem. And we also have to take into consideration the difference in terms of where companies are actually detecting the content itself. And so whether it be in messaging or in storage in the cloud, all of these technical nuances change the way that companies may need to detect, or what is most viable, or what will be the most valuable in terms of detecting and finding the content. So we need to remain open to the fact that there may be different types of solutions for different companies. And then the last point that we wanted to stress was this future-proofing point, which I already kind of touched on, but we're having this conversation now, but when are we and when will we be able to talk about what's coming next? VR, how cryptocurrency may introduce a financial component back into this. Blockchain, a hash that goes into the blockchain will remain there forever. There is literally no way to remove it at this stage. How are we creating space for innovation, funding for innovation, so that technologists, those who often have built these systems, can use their talent and their expertise to also design how we can detect this content and take it down? And also, how do we educate that next group of technologists so that when they're building a new product, they're thinking of child safety from the beginning, as opposed to an afterthought later on? And this is a shift that we need to see happen throughout all of industry at large. So how do we make sure that innovation is a part of this future vehicle and allows, again, for that quick and rapid deployment with transparency? So there has to be transparency. We totally understand that. And so we're going to have to get really creative about how to balance those two efforts at once. I'd like to end with just saying that in regards to the European Center, we believe that there is immense potential to increase global collaboration if done well, and not continuing to create silos of information and data. Again, folks have touched on this, but you can have an instance where you have a offender in Australia sending an image to someone in Germany, where it's a US-based company that's receiving the report, and the victim is in the Philippines. So this is a truly international crime that is existing online, and recognizing that those jurisdictions are hard to delineate oftentimes between if the goal and intention is to find the victim, find the offender, and make sure that image doesn't spread online. We need that global collaboration at scale, which is going to take all of us on this call doing all the incredible work that we do. And so just to end, I'd say we're really excited to continue to participate in these conversations. Grateful to the Renew Group for hosting this conversation today. And thank you so much for the time and the chance to speak to such an incredible community.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your wonderful contribution. Thank you as well for the wonderful work done by Thorn in this domain. Thank you so much. So now, last but definitely not least, I'd like to give the floor to Ora Salla, who serves as Public Policy Director and Head of the EU Affairs for Facebook. Ora, now you see, we've been seeing as well in the images and the figures shared by John, how the new legislation has affected and and also the major contribution, in fact, the crucial role played by Facebook in the fight against child sexual abuse. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for hosting this very timely and very important seminar. Honorable members and all participants, at Facebook, our work on child safety has spanned over a decade and remains one of our most important responsibilities. Across our family of apps, so I'm not only talking about Facebook, of course, Instagram and WhatsApp also, we take a very comprehensive approach to child safety, and that includes zero tolerance policies prohibiting child exploitation, cutting-edge technology to prevent, detect, remove, and as discussed here, report policy violations, and victim resources and support. And because our commitment to safeguarding children extends beyond our apps to the broader internet, we also collaborate with industry, child safety experts, and civil society around the world to fight the online exploitation of children. As we know, child sexual abuse and exploitation online takes many forms, as discussed here today. The issue plays out differently on different kinds of digital services, and all digital platforms and services, be they social media, gaming, live streaming, messaging services, app stores, and virtual private networks. And these all play a part in combating these heinous crimes. Yeah, indeed. We also know that offenders try to abuse digital services to connect with other offenders, to attempt to have inappropriate interactions with children, sometimes referred to as grooming, and to find and share child sexual abuse material. This can be through the sharing of existing or new content, as also many people said here, which has not been previously identified. It would be difficult to say what types of child sexual abuse online and relative activities are most concerning. Any form of child sexual abuse and exploitation can have a devastating impact on the victim, and the potential redistribution of their abuse content continues to worsen the trauma, fear, and vulnerability. Every part of the internet ecosystem must respond to this problem. As noted in the We Protect Alliance voluntary principles to counter online child sexual abuse, exploitation, and abuse, companies will need to respond differently depending on the nature of the service, our risk factors, available technologies, terms of services, and legal obligations, as well as privacy considerations. It's also why in August 2021, Facebook was proud to lead the Technology Coalition's project Protect Renewed Commitment and Investment, along with 15 other tech companies in tech innovation, collective action, independent reach, knowledge sharing, transparency, and accountability in the protection of children online. On EU regulation, I would just like to say that now when EU institutions look how to best approach the challenge of regulating the detection, reporting, and removal of online child sexual abuse material, I would really take this opportunity to highlight a few elements we believe are important in any future legislation for your consideration. Firstly, we at Facebook, we believe that legal certainty regarding the detection of child sexual abuse material is fundamental. For this reason, we believe strongly that an express legal basis explicitly addressing the use of data for the purposes of detection and reporting of child sexual abuse material is required to provide legal certainty to the important work undertaken across industry for combating child sexual abuse online. We also believe that the framework should consider the broader legislative framework and align to the principles at the basis of the proposed Digital Services Act. In particular, we recommend maintaining the necessary legal safeguards to ensure that service providers voluntarily curbing the spread of child sexual abuse online do not risk losing the limited liability protections currently enshrined under Article 14 of the E-Commerce Directive. The proposed Digital Services Act also foresees provision that protects an online platform who undertakes certain proactive measures to protect users against illegal content from legal liability. Any potential framework should also reflect the varied and dynamic nature of online communications. So we would advise against one-size-fits-all solution. Policymakers should also take into consideration the nature of the underlying service users' expectations in using the services, especially around privacy and the various features of the service in any definition. It also should define adequate safeguards, efficiently balancing the digital safety interest with users' privacy rights. Finally, any framework should not undermine, prohibit, or weaken end-to-end encryption. Let me just conclude saying that this is a topic that we take utmost seriousness, and we are working 24/7 to detect any child exploitation on any of our platforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aura, and thank you so much as well for conveying Facebook commitment in this regard. Thank you so much for that. So I'd like now to open the floor for a Q&A session. I know that there are other people following online. I invite people, if they have specific questions, to use the chat box that is in the live stream link. If not, I see here there are a few questions already. I just wanted to say before opening the Q&A that this is a good exercise that we are having here. Has been said initially in the first panel and this panel, Renew Europe Group is actually giving a lot of importance to this topic, to child safety online and in the digital world, and wants to position itself as a front runner in securing a free and safe internet for children. So I very much also invite maybe later as well all the panelists if they want to share some other few thoughts after the Q&A session, because the idea is as well for the members of the Parliament or the Renew Europe Group to then compile sort of a one-pager document that they can use as a basis as well as we move forward for the legislation. So now I'm just going to open then the floor. I see that there is a question from John Carr from ECPAT International that is directed to Catherine. I'm going to read it out. So Article 6 on the draft DSA makes clear no online businesses will be at legal risk if they take voluntary measures to detect, identify, and remove or disable access to illegal content. Most people had assumed that that was the status quo, although, as now know, maybe it wasn't so if it is cleared up. Okay, that is good. But Article 7 says that no online businesses will be under an obligation even to try to seek facts or circumstances indicating illegal activities. That makes no sense. It just at any rate it is confusing. So doesn't Article 7 preempt, anticipate, and undermine the debate that will later take place on the new EU strategy to combat child sexual exploitation that Catherine spoke about? So Catherine, I think John is asking if the formulation of the current Article 7 in the draft or DSA is a bit contradicting what you have presented as the intention of the European Commission in the upcoming long-term legislation.
Yes, thanks so much, Emilio, for reading out this question, and thanks, John, for asking it. So the Digital Services Act will provide the bottom line on dealing with illegal content and activities online. And it's the horizontal approach. And it's basically an embodiment of two main principles. First of all, we recognize that the internet as such has only come into existence with the services it provides because those services are not automatically held liable for all actions of their users. That's a very fundamental principle that has allowed the development of a lot of services that would not have come into existence had their authors been held responsible for every action of the users who make use of their product. So that's something that the EU is seeking to preserve with the Digital Services Act. And that's something that is laid down in Article 7 of the DSA. At the same time, the DSA in itself is already a recognition that that's not enough and that we need to at least hold, make it easier to hold authors accountable for their actions online. And the DSA does so inter alia by facilitating the reporting of content and by building out a very robust trusted flagger system while also taking measures to ensure that there's no over removal and chilling of discussion online and freedom of expression. And it also creates the so-called duties of care for very large platforms. And here I think we find reflected what Aura has also highlighted as a need, that we cannot have a one size fits all, and that some actors, as Sarah was also saying, can do more than others. So already in and of itself, the Digital Services Act says, while there does not need to be any active monitoring or seeking out of any sort of illegal circumstances, at the same time, companies of a certain size do need to take measures to ensure a certain level of safety of their systems and security of their users. And the child sexual abuse legislation will develop this aspect. So we do not see Article 7 as a hindrance in this respect, because we will not be asking anyone to look for any kind of issue, but rather for specific indicators that we hope can be provided by the center, such as has already been cited by other intervenants, like a hash list or a set of indicators that can reliably point to instances of child sexual abuse, which is not the same as asking companies to be on the lookout for any kind of illegal activity.
Thank you, Catherine, for such clarification and very accurate answer to John's question. I have another question coming again from Child Focus Belgium, from Niels. Niels asks, so since we can all agree that the responsibility of internet services providers and industry is huge, and that quite clearly the self-regulation doesn't seem to work, how do we make sure that more efforts are done in that regard? I don't know who of the panelists would like to take. Arda, I see. Yes, please.
Yeah, well, I think we're talking here about EU regulation, and the discussion unfortunately goes for many times to United States-based tech companies. So we're talking about Facebook, about Google, about counterparts like that. But I would like to address the fact that many of the material that we see that's being spread are spread in Europe on image hosters. So we have different kind of platforms. And it will not be difficult to work or collaborate with big organizations who have a good policy and everything. But I remember Signe saying the problem of all these webcam activity, Omegle, chat roulette. Well, even if we have regulation, they probably go to a country where they think they can do whatever they want. So I really think that we need to see how we can cooperate with them in a way that we can make it as easy for them as possible. I see Signe, you want to say something, but my experience, we work a lot with image hosters, with the hashtag server. My experience is that most of these guys, there's just a side job for them. So everything that will be more costly or more effort or technically difficult, they just won't do it. And this is what we've seen once we implemented the hashtag server and put more pressure, that we have a very low threshold for them to use it. And some of them, started using it. Others just left the country and went to Romania, where they don't have that pressure. So we need to, I'd rather have all the image hosters in the Netherlands complying with the rules that we have than them leaving. So we need to find a balance somewhere, and we need to do it by offering them tools to clean up their services with a very low threshold. But on the other hand, we also need to put a little bit of pressure on them, because if we don't, they'll just, and we need to understand where they are coming from.
Thank you, Signe.
Yeah, thank you, Emilio. In terms of the comment that self-regulation isn't working, I think it's spot on. It's abundantly apparent. This has been a failed social experiment. Part of what we believe is absolutely essential is that we are arming governments with the information. A lot of them have no idea the state of the nation online for children. They're not in the trenches seeing exactly what's happening to kids. We have to be transparent around the information and data that we're sharing. Everybody needs to jump in, and we have a major commitment to providing these. We're working closely with the Five Eyes, sharing what we're seeing online. It's essential for us to get to a place where kids are properly protected. I would also, in terms of Arda's comments about companies moving around, yes, they will move around, but we have to make this a hostile environment for people to be operating and affecting children. So we've had, it's that, as well as media exposure. I mean, we issued our transparency report and noted that Free was a huge violator at free.fr of basically sharing archives, and it had been up for years, if not decades. So suddenly this gets reported in Forbes, and within 48 hours, the service is knocked out. So, really at the end of the day, we also have to take the focus off of big tech, because big tech is doing things, but this issue is so much broader than big tech. And that's resulting in an enormous impact to children. So I think we have to keep attacking it at a multitude of levels if we hope to change the state of the nation for kids.
Thank you so much, Signe. So unfortunately, we don't have any more time to take more questions. So now give the floor to MEP Vautmans to do the conclusive remarks. Thank you all for participating. And this was a very important and very phenomenal exercise. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Emilio. And thank you for moderating this whole seminar. I think it's always good when you have Emilio at your side in the fight against child sexual abuse. We are very strong. And that's actually the message I want to say today. You all, with all your declarations, with all your presentations, you give us the power and the energy to continue our fight. I think that's very important. You give us the content to continue our fight in the parliament, because we can only do our job well. And I think Liesje also can admit that. Liesje, we can only continue our fight, and we can only win this fight when we do it together. And you need to feed us. You need to give us those figures. You need to give us those testimonials. You have to keep us awake, because as a politician, we always have plenty of problems, and all citizens ask us a lot of things. But actually, Liesje and I, we promise you we will make from this fight our priority together with you all. So thank you very much. And maybe Liesje, you also want to say something, because we did this together, and sometimes we really need to hold each other hands and say, come on, Liesje, we will continue, we will do it. And so Liesje, also thank you very much to do this fight together with me. And thank you all for your afternoon and for the content and your energy. Thank you very much.
Liesje,
yes.
Please. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I would also like to thank all the speakers of this panel. I thank the speakers of the former panel, and I fully agree with what Hilde said. Please keep us updated, and we will make this is our fight, is our priority. And thank you so much for your contributions and for the fight you are also putting up. I think we are in this together. And so thank you very much. And Hilde, thank you for doing this with me and continuing this fight.
help us with putting this together. Thank you, everyone.